Chapter 11, Face to Face with the Dean 2. As large as Sylvania's campus was, the administrative chart was equally as complicated. Even though it may look like a spider web, these kinds of charts would usually become quite simple towards the top. Dean McDowell of Sylvania's magic department had the highest authority among the 3 deans of the academy. He was also part of that simple section of the administrative chart. From the top, his name stems from the second branch, right after the assistant headmaster. The academic affairs staff didn't go through with your expulsion process. Well, I guess they figured there wasn't a need for it. At first glance, he seemed like an easy-going person, with his bushy beard and worn-out glasses. But his attitude towards me was anything but. I didn't touch the tea his secretary served me, knowing I wasn't in a friendly atmosphere. Do you want us to have to go through the academic regulations and invoke the disciplinary committee to sentence you to leave the academy? Dean McDowell said with a firm face as he sat across from me. Even though it was an unexpected truth spoken with power and attitude that held weight, this was just a superficial appearance from the dean. An act to cover up his compassionate and weak-hearted personality. It was a fact only revealed through completing the sub-quests. So as someone who had gone through the hardships of completing every story branch of Sylvania's failed swordmaster, this wasn't surprising. After all, in order to serve as the dean in a place full of strong characters like the magic department, it was inevitable for him to take on a rather coercive attitude. That's just the nature of academic politics, to take advantage of pushovers. It's why it was admirable that he was able to maintain his true character. If it's too difficult to go through all that process, the academic affairs will just expel you. This was why I couldn't help but be puzzled for 2 reasons. First, just as I mentioned, Dean McDowell was not the kind of person to confront his students. So to act in such a threatening manner didn't suit him. Second was his position as the dean. Not only was he a dean, he also held the highest authority over the other deans. He was in a position where he didn't have to be involved in expelling a student. Rather, he was someone who reviewed and approved implementation plans. His position didn't match this kind of grunt work. Calling a student over and sitting him down to discuss whether to expel them or not, it was strange. It would be similar to going to the district office to get a copy of a document only to see the head of the office was the one reviewing complaints. Do you have any excuse for this? If I were a regular student, I wouldn't have been able to think this far. I probably would have panicked that a high-ranking noble called me to declare I was expelled from the academy. After giving it this much thought, I saw his true intention. He was only trying to get me flustered. That is a reasonable thing to say. I decided to respond with something simple to allow me more time to think. I was in a luxurious and elegant reception room, put in the unusual situation of suddenly having to leave such a public event like the opening ceremony. Having dressed up well, I was now in a private meeting with someone of high authority, his intense and threatening attitude compounded with the gloomy possibility of being expelled right before my eyes. The higher your rank was, the better you were at creating these kinds of situational pressures. He was just trying to see my reaction to this situation. But then, the question followed. Just why? Ed Roths-Taylor was just an ordinary student from a noble family. He didn't have any prominent magical talent, nor did he stand out in terms of writing. And one's nobility was nothing more than a business card in Sylvania. There were so many students from either noble or rich families. Even the princess herself was a student. So how was Ed Roths-Taylor considered important enough for a private conversation, taking up the dean's precious time? There were only a few possibilities. I sighed deeply. I'd like to thank Princess Peenia for looking over the people, even in the academy. She always paid careful attention, no matter how insignificant. I said without obvious reason. Suddenly mentioning the princess while talking about my possible expulsion, it would be ridiculous to say something unrelated to the conversation. What are you talking about? Why are we talking about that now? These reactions should follow. But, what did you say? And in that short moment, I saw the dean's forehead narrow. It was very brief, but I caught his reaction. Just what are you talking about now? Nevertheless, he was able to maintain his position as chief dean for over 5 years. It took him less than a second to school his face back into a poker face. But that brief moment was enough for me to realize the truth. Just as I thought. There were only 3 people in the academy who were of higher authority than Dean McDowell: Headmaster Obel, Assistant Headmaster Reina, and Princess Peenia. Since I didn't have any connection to either the headmaster nor the assistant headmaster, there was no reason for them to care about me. This made the possibility of it being the princess much higher. No matter how the virtue of learning takes precedence over nobility in the academy, it wouldn't have been possible to just ignore the princess's words. In a way, this was very much like Princess Peenia. Why didn't she just gather up her soldiers to tie me up and blackmail me to reveal all my secrets in detail to want to get expelled? Did she not think that would have made me confess everything? Or were such barbaric and coercive means not her style? Or perhaps she found them meaningless? It was probably both. But looking at the results, it was a correct judgment. Even if they tied me up and blackmailed me, I wouldn't have been able to confess that I merely possessed this body, and that Ed Roth's Taylor was a separate person from me. There was no way they would have believed it. I would have been treated like a madman. That's why she came up with something else. Nothing, it was just something I blurted out. I apologize. Ha ha, what am I talking about? Must be because I'm nervous, ha 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 ha. I mumbled and scratched the back of my head, as if I was embarrassed. I laughed like an idiot, but Dean McDowell's eyes sharply looked at me. He was already used to these kinds of situations. I already figured that out a while ago. But this push and pull had gone too far. I was just thinking about what the correct answer might be. I decided to go with confidence. I was just wondering what could be the reason for calling me out to sit here while you measure my potential, and what I should say to get the correct answer. I knew that sentencing someone with an expulsion was just to make an example for others. That was just a fact based on the natural circumstances. I am trying to figure you out, to some extent, was what he really meant. If this was someone overbearing and oppressive, this kind of approach would have been counterproductive, since they might view it as me trying to be on par with them, hurting their ego. But I already knew that Dean McDowell was surprisingly not authoritative like that. I know what I did was wrong, but I don't think it was a mistake deserving of expulsion. If you look through the academy's bylaws, there is enough reason to expel you. Weren't bylaws and regulations always vague and ambiguous? There's a lot of room for interpretation. That's why there's a disciplinary committee, giving students the chance to speak. I decided to go with a basic answer. That said, I think I have no choice but to take advantage of all the opportunities available to me, persuading the disciplinary committee members as much as possible, putting up posters on the academic affairs wall, and persuading my classmates. I'm going to file an appeal that I was treated unfairly. It would become troublesome for the academy. Are you threatening me? Not at all. This is just what I believe, I said with confidence. It wasn't like I was in a position to give out threats. What kind of threat could a student on the verge of expulsion give against the head dean? If they really wanted to expel me, they could simply ignore such trivial words. It might have been annoying and irritating for a bit, but it would have just ended there. After all, there was no way the other students would sympathize with Ed Roth's Taylor. I'm just doing everything that I can. If I get expelled, there's nothing I can do. But I think I will regret it later if I just leave the academy without doing anything. I took a sip of the tea they gave me. Is this much good enough for a correct answer? I feel like I was talking to him while wearing a mask. I'm sure it was the very same for him. For a while, there was silence. McDowell looked at me for a long time, his hand resting on his chin. After a moment, he finally said something. Princess Peenia said there was something a bit difficult about you. At this point, I kind of agree with what she said. The blessing of insightful eyes that judges humans, and the dean's secret conversation with the princess who was born with it. The fact that Princess Peenia was destined to always pay attention to me, without any mention, we already both knew. You are cunning like a fox, but I don't feel any ill intent inside of you. If you say that, wouldn't it seem like I'm trying to trick you? You are calmer than the other students who tremble just by sitting in this office. Did I act too calmly? That's what I thought. But there was nothing I could do about it now. Anyways, let's end it here. I'll hold off on answering whether you gave the correct answer or not. Then about my expulsion, what will happen to it? Dean McDowell laughed out loud, smiling widely. It was my first time seeing the Dean like this. You're also quite sly. Didn't you already know I had no intention to expel you? Didn't you already notice from the very beginning? To say that in such a roundabout but sophisticated way, now that was the Dean McDowell that I knew. I almost got fucked. I threw firewood into the campfire and sighed in relief. I didn't know what it was, but it felt like a very important turning point for my future plans. Even though I said all that, I knew I might have lost everything had I answered wrong. I took a peek at McDowell when I closed the door and left, but his relaxed and laughing face had gone. He looked agonized and serious once again. He was seriously evaluating me. I shouldn't let my guard down around him. Anyway, since the dice had already been rolled, I would just do what I had to do. Newly crafted product. Simple drying rack. A simple wooden dryer capable of drying laundry, food, and other things. The support is not strong enough to bear a lot of weight. Production difficulty level 2. Production completed. Production skills have increased. Wiping my sweat off, I was delighted by the good news of my simple drying rack. I felt like checking my daily life production skills. Since I had been so busy, I hadn't had the time to check my skills in detail. Life skills details. Grade, beginner craftsman, specialized fields, woodworking, handicraft level 10, design level 2, gathering level 3, woodworking level 7, fishing level 3, cooking level 4. My handicraft skill had already reached 10. It was a skill that served as the foundation for the other skills. It was also the skill directly connected to my dexterity stat. In other words, as my proficiency level for this skill rises, so will my proficiency with my other skills. In addition to that, there was a huge significance for having reached the level 10 of a skill. It meant I had fully learned the basics of that skill. After reaching this level, the required experience for each subsequent level rises significantly. This meant that a proper investment needed to be made. I flopped down on the flat rock, staying near the heat of the campfire. Compared to the sofa in the dean's office, this was too hard and cold. But ever since coming into this world, I had been indebted to this rock, so much so that it felt like it was now perfectly molded into the shape of my butt. Sitting in my camp that had truly become like my own home, I opened and closed the palms of my hands in front of my eyes. As expected, this guy shouldn't have been born a noble. My daily life production skills are leveling dramatically faster than my combat or magic skills. Even with natural-born talent, no one could thrive unless there was support from the environment. Since Ed grew up as a pampered noble, he lived his life ruining his talents in production. He probably thought cooking and fixing things were acts too lowly for his status. Well, it couldn't be helped. He was a noble, after all. Nevertheless, I was able to create a somewhat livable space for myself through my hard work. My living circumstances might make me seem like a homeless person when compared to that of Ophelis Hall, Sylvania's dormitory, which had the best facilities on campus. But I have already grown attached to this camp which I built with my own hands. And because I indulged in the feast at the opening ceremony, I didn't feel the slightest bit of hunger at all. I might just fall asleep like this. But I can't fall asleep quite yet. I had a lot of spare time because today was only the opening ceremony. And because I still didn't have any classes to be late to, there was no need to rush this morning. This enabled me to take a leisurely walk to school, leaving me with a lot of energy. I picked up a few books I had on the grass. I didn't want to sleep just yet as I was planning to read before it got any darker. I borrowed a book from the library about various edible plants and wild herbs. Knowledge was a survival skill. I could expand my diet if I were able to distinguish the edible plant life in the forest. Maybe I should try making a workbench or a reading table. I could give it a try over the weekend. With that in mind, I laid down in my simple wooden shelter and opened the book. And fell asleep within seconds. Like I had fainted. Well, honestly, I was a bit tired. Tucked in a corner of the academic district was the dean of the magic department's office. Dean McDowell was sitting on the couch, holding his chin, thinking. It had been a while since Ed Roths-Taylor left. He was still sitting there despite having a lot of work left, deep in thought without moving an inch. The dean's secretary sighed at the sight as she organized documents. It had been a while since the dean would become so deeply immersed in his thoughts that he would end up doing nothing. This caused his work to get delayed, which meant the secretary also couldn't leave on time. So she decided to clean her desk as it looked like she wouldn't be able to go home on time anyway. She had been putting it off for a while, after all. It seems like he might be out of it for a while. I wonder what he's thinking about so deeply like that. The secretary looked at Dean McDowell, who looked like a statue lost in thought, and then looked out the window full of stars. The starry sky was very beautiful today, thanks to the clear sky. She opened the window to let some air in. Secretary Anyus. Dean McDowell suddenly called her. Was my acting that obvious? Excuse me. The dean was usually so perfect that sometimes, Anyus herself wonders if he had a dual personality. At the very least, as the dean's secretary, she should know as she was always there. Anyus stuttered that wasn't the case to answer the dean's strange question. And just like that, the night over the academic district grew darker. Chapter 12, Stray Cat 1. As was common knowledge, games were usually played from the protagonist's point of view. This meant there weren't a lot of things I could do since I've already had my downfall, played my part, and essentially left the stage. However, the great news was that since I've already played the game several times from the protagonist's point of view, I could roughly guess what event was currently happening, just based on the timing in the Academy's schedule. This meant there was no reason for me to feel frustrated from not knowing the state the Academy was in or what was going on. I felt comforted by this fact. On the contrary, I was surprised by how many things I didn't know because the game progressed from Taylor's point of view. An example would be the magic department's curriculum. As the main character, Taylor was a student of the combat department, hence the game's title, Failed Swordmaster. This meant there was no way for the player to know what kind of life the magic department students had. Another example was the things that happened outside of Taylor's activities, like the new buildings and statues being built under the sponsorship of the Golden Daughter, Lortel, as well as the royal knights stationed at the entrance of the academic district to escort the benevolent Princess Peenia. Even though these things were not part of the main story, they made the world look and feel alive. In fact, I had quite a few stories I was curious about that were never revealed in the game. There were countless of them, but if I had to pick just one, it would have to be Yennefer Polarover. As the final boss of Act 1, the story of her being possessed by the high-ranking dark spirit Velisper was not seriously fleshed out. She might have been considered the final boss on paper, but the real boss was Velisper, whom she summoned, the right-hand man of the highest-ranking dark spirit Glaskin. But high-ranking dark spirits descended through an elementalist's pessimistic thoughts are the darkness in their heart. And while there was darkness in everyone, no matter how big or small, wasn't Yennefer someone who was completely removed from such darkness. She had a bright personality by nature, born with such liveliness and joy. Just what in the world happened to Yennefer that she would fall under the influence of a high-ranking dark spirit? Not like I had the time to pay attention to that. Whatever it may be, Taylor would take care of Velisper and save the student center. This is too hard. It had been 10 days since school started. Wouldn't I die at this rate? Like, seriously. I was resting on a bench in the academic district, the sun setting over the horizon, when I was hit with a moment of post-nut clarity out of nowhere. TN, metaphor, a moment of realization. My daily routine every school day was as follows. I would wake up before sunrise and thoroughly wash myself in the stream, making sure to clean every nook and cranny as I was afraid of smelling. I would then run to the academic district through the northern forest wearing casual clothes that I could wash every day. I would always be covered in sweat by the time I arrived, so I would secretly wash up in the bathroom of Glocked Hall. Then I would change into my school uniform, and hide my casual clothes in the grass in the rose garden to take with me after school. After all of that, I would head to the hall where my classes took place. It was where I met and mingled with children from noble families and top students alike, so I had to be careful of maintaining an upright behavior. My reputation was already rock bottom in the academy, so I had to deal with all sorts of gossip whenever I passed by. I even started feeling empty when I didn't hear such gossip around me these days. I also got used to being invisible in my classes. After focusing on my studies, it was lunchtime. I would eat lunch boxes because I couldn't afford the expensive and luxurious cafeteria at Offellis Hall, nor the cafeteria in the Student Union building. My lunch boxes were my usual wild meals I brought from my camp. I had been using rock salts to make beef jerky lately. I would hang the cured meat for about 3 days in the simple drying rack I crafted. This, somehow, enabled me to make decent beef jerky. There was no better and simpler food than a jerky, as it was a portable meal that also satisfied my hunger. My cooking proficiency also increased due to it, which was a bonus. After filling up with lunch, I would finish the afternoon lectures like an invisible ghost, all the way to the end of the school day. I would then take the casual clothes I hid and head back into the northern forest. Leaving around sunset allowed me to arrive at my camp just as it was getting dark. I tried training my vitality stat in the beginning by running back home as much as possible. But ever since we started magic practical classes, the use of magic power left me without much energy, so I've had to walk back home slowly. The first thing I would do when I returned to camp was wash the sweaty casual clothes I wore that morning. I always had to dry it in advance so I could wear it again the next day. I would also inspect my school uniform to make sure it was kept elegant and neat at all times. I had to make sure there was no dirt on it, nor any tears. And if any was found, I would immediately repair it using thread I took from other fabrics. After dealing with my clothes, I would then do everything else I needed to do for the day, which differed from day to day. I would check if I was running out of any herbs or medicinal plants, and if I was, I would then go out and collect some. I also always checked the condition of the pile of wood I had trimmed. I would also check the cave for my meat supply. If I noticed I had started to run out, I would take my bow and go out to hunt. It was actually more convenient to hunt using the harpoon and spear I previously made. But with my future in mind, I forced myself to hunt using the bow because I knew I had to level up my proficiency for it. But if the results for that day's hunt were too abysmal, of course, I would use a different weapon. I needed to eat to live, after all. And after the sun had fully set, I would light up the campfire so I had a secure light source. Then it was time to do my homework. I would go over the practice assignments on a wide stone plate I had fashioned into a workbench. My strong suits were areas where writing was an important factor, like magic history and elemental studies. Thankfully, I was still a quick thinker. It had been a while since I held a pen, but there was also a time when I was a test taker, going through the rough period of studying to pass Korea's college entrance exam. It was as if my body still remembered all my study habits from that time. Hooray for South Korea's private education craze. I used a small poker to write on the stone slab with ashes. I had also borrowed books from the student library since there was no way I could afford my own personal books, nor a quill pen and ink. And as the moon rose high in the sky, I would practice magic alone. My first goal was to get my elemental beginner magic proficiency to level 10. The second-year curriculum already introduced intermediate magic, so there would be nothing I could do if I was stuck struggling with beginner magic. I trained my magic practically by using wind blade to trim trees and controlling the campfire using my fire-type magic. I would start feeling sleepy at this point, but I knew it wasn't time to sleep quite yet. I still had a lot of work to do before I could go to bed. I would inspect my simple shelter and check for any problems, then I would replenish the firewood in the campfire to make sure it had enough through the night. After this, I would check the beef jerky I bring to school the next day, as well as my water container, which I refill as needed. I would then go over tomorrow's timetable and organize my thoughts on how I will spend the next day. After that, I would fill the shelter with campfire smoke to drive the bugs away. Then I ventilate it and finally go to bed, where I would get about 4 hours or so of good sleep. Thankfully, I never overslept no matter how tired I was. Owing to having gone to the military, I got used to this routine pretty quickly. This was the life I led for the last 10 days. My whole body had been screaming from the muscle pains. I looked up at the sunset sky as I sat on the bench, taking a short break from my current situation. When I go back to camp, there would be a mountain of work I needed to do. At the very least, I should move the camp a little closer. I thought about it for a moment and shook my head no. Nothing good would come out of living among the other students' living areas. Plus, the long distance I traveled to and fro every day helped with my vitality. No, don't be weak. Agak. I could barely get my creaky body up from the wooden bench to get back on the road again. But what more could I do when I possessed a body like this? I had to accept this much. Surely, better days were bound to come. But a fortunate thought came to mind as I traversed through the northern forest. That the past 10 days had given me confidence in my ability to sustain this lifestyle. I had somehow managed to keep at it, no matter how fucking difficult and tiring it had been. It was probably because my student life had been calmer and more peaceful than I had imagined. Everyone would gossip and look at me with contempt wherever I went. In the end, I didn't really care anymore. What could I even do about it? It wasn't even me who did those things. And besides, Ed Roth's Taylor was just unlikable, to begin with. It was a much better situation than with the first years, where chaos would break loose left and right, always out for an adventure. As it was early in the first semester, Spear from Nature Ziggs must have already blown up the research building, and Lazy Lucy had already electrocuted the dean's cat with lightning magic. Their year already had a lot of events happening. Additionally, the first-year students of the Combat, Magic and Alchemy department must have already had their first hands-on class against monsters. Soon enough, the main character Taylor would start meeting the other main characters and getting acquainted with them. Taking a step backstage, my surprisingly calm and regular life continued. Yeah, it wasn't so bad when I thought about it this way. After all, if one were to keep reliving a hard and tiring day by day, they would eventually get used to it. All I had to do was stay away from the main characters and continue on with my life. Then, I would earn my diploma, and when the academy goes into chaos. Bye-bye. Well, not that the academy would collapse. It was an ordeal that would resolve on its own, so not like there was a reason for me to deal with it. When I thought of things like this, I couldn't help but think I've been doing a good job thus far. Yeah, there was no reason to feel frustrated over anything. Except for one variable. Yennecar Polarover. Hello. What are you eating? Dried meat. Good morning. What's your next class? Elemental Studies. Do you want to eat? At the student cafeteria with me. These past 10 days, whenever Yennecar saw me around the academic district, she would always give me an unchanging lively greeting. Of course, her two best friends would always appear and drag her away soon after. This wasn't part of my plan. There shouldn't be a reason for her to be this interested in me. Did I make some type of mistake? Or was there an aspect I hadn't realized? Well, it should be fine. Through the forest, the sun had begun to set. And across the branches, I began to see my camp that had now comfortably become my home. But it was still a long way home. I had said this before, but I was a foreign entity in this world who would follow its authentic story. If I were to become a variable that could change the flow of the world, then I would have lost my advantage of knowing the future. Therefore, it was only right that I maintained a certain distance from the important people of this world. Well, it might have been awkward to forcefully try to become close, but it was easy to keep my distance. I could do this. The post-nut clarity from a while ago had begun to fade to some extent. And the hope that I would be able to do well took its spot. Yes, one way or another, everything would work out. I had been keeping my distance from other people, so much so that it had become so boring, but that's okay. I could do this. With my heart filled with hope and the drive to live today to the fullest, I took a step into my camp. Z's. It was then that I found a girl curled up and sleeping in my simple shelter. Her neck was covered by the brim of her witch's hat, so wide that it could cover the entirety of her face. And her breathing, that breathing that sounded as if everything was bothering her, I was able to figure out her identity as soon as I heard it. I sat down on a rock. Sigh. It was a sigh from the depths of my heart. Just why is this girl sleeping here? It was the first time meeting her, but how could I not know her? She would play an active part from the beginning till the end of Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster. She was such an important person that she could be considered on the same level as the other 4 heroines. She was someone with an important presence in the main story. It might be hard to judge by her appearance, with how she seemed lazy and uninterested, but she was overwhelmingly one of the most important characters. So why the fuck was she sleeping here? Quote. I looked around my camp. We were in the northern forest of Akan Island. A faraway place where nobody went. But to a student who was as genius as she was, to use her magic power to traverse through space so quickly was as easy as breathing. This forest wouldn't have been that far for her. First of all, her behavior could be likened to that of a street cat. Due to her small body and her talent to bounce around using magic swiftly, she could go to the top of the clock tower, or the rooftop of Glocked Hall, or any great place for naps where she would get the perfect amount of sunlight. She could literally go anywhere. So why the hell is she here? To this place where there were no people, which was far away from the academic buildings, where a shelter with a roof was, where you could hear the cool wind and the pleasant sound of the stream. There was no better place to skip classes and take a nap. Fuck. It was my own fault. I shouted out too late, my monologue meaningless. I could hear lazy Lucy gently exhale as she slept, as if in a whisper. I covered my eyes with one hand in exasperation. I had no choice but to sit still for a while. Chapter 13, Stray Cat 2. It might be rude to compare people to animals, but Yennecar Polarover reminds me of an overly excited golden retriever, someone whom people would naturally gravitate towards. She was similar to a puppy waving its tail to happily greet everyone. And wouldn't you want to hug or pat such a puppy? That was probably what our class felt with Yennecar. They always flock to her whenever they see her, hugging her and linking arms with her. In fact, they would always aggressively stare at me if I so much as stepped within a 3-meter radius of her, in fear that I might be a bad influence. Now, if Yennecar was like a cute puppy, then Lucy Mariel was a stray cat. Yes, the sound of her rough breathing while cuddled up did indeed resemble that of a cat, but it wasn't just about her outer appearance. You see, wild stray cats could never be tamed. They were never affectionate or friendly to passers-by, or at least, all the stray cats I had seen in my life were. Street cats had their own rules in life which they followed amongst themselves. They were always the center of their world, even if they were living in some shabby back alley somewhere. And no matter how dirty and ragged their fur was, their steps were always refined, like that of a princess. And it wasn't like such an attitude was due to their vanity, nor were they acting like that on purpose. It's just the way they were born. And Lucy Mariel was born just like that. She stretched as she sat up. It had been about 30 minutes since I came back to my camp only to find Lucy sleeping in my shelter. I spent that time sitting down and thinking about what I was supposed to do about her. The sun had almost fully set, and on a spring day such as this, the high sky had begun to darken. Quote. Lucy sat absent-mindedly, her eyes not fully awake yet. A few strands of her hair were stubbornly stuck on her cheek. And as soon as she woke up in someone else's place, the first thing she said was, quote. I'm hungry. Ah, I admire her for such a talent. We finally met eyes, and for a while, I just sat there on my rock by the campfire and stared at her without a word, chin propped by the palm of my hand. If she were any regular girl, she would have already grasped the situation and felt embarrassed. But this was Lucy Mariel. Out of 100 points, about 90. I just sat still. I think the way you covered it with leaves was nice because it allowed the sunlight to only subtly pass through. The breeze flowing inside was also refreshing, which was good. As soon as I laid down, I fell asleep right away. Did my camp just become one of Lucy Mariel's top 3 places to take a nap in Sylvania Academy? But I didn't have a choice but to sleep face down as the floor was covered with clothes. It would have been nicer had it been a little softer. But it blocks the sun quite well, and I also liked the sound of the flowing stream nearby. She expertly assessed without changing her blank facial expression. It was great. There was no change in her expression, but there was a strange twinkling feeling that convinced me she felt quite satisfied. Just what the hell am I saying? Lucy stood up and stretched her limbs once more. My wooden shelter was wider than one might think. But that's all it was. Its width was wide, but the ceiling stopped around my shoulders. To put it simply, I couldn't stand inside. So seeing Lucy stretching inside such a narrow space made me realize our difference in physique. She really was a small girl. Even the sleeves of her school uniform were loose despite her wearing what must have been the smallest size. Suddenly, Lucy's stomach started to rumble as she popped out of the shelter. Yes, popped out, was the perfect way to describe her. Action. Her footwork resembled those of Muram martial arts movies. She was gathering magic at the tip of her toes and was using elemental wind and gravity magic, along with high-level shock absorption magic, just to land her small body in her desired place. She was using all kinds of high-level magic as she moved around, as if she was a god. She was multicasting 5 or 6 spells that even professors at the magic department would need to concentrate to use. She was doing everything instinctively, unconsciously. Is this dried meat? Can I eat it? Lucy picked up a piece of jerky I had lying around and took a bite off it. She licked her lips as she chewed. EGHK. It's too salty. She stuck out her tongue with a frown. Though, there also seems to be an indescribable taste. She then took another bite. She seemed to start to enjoy the salty taste after chewing for a while, so she ended up eating the whole thing. Then she pointed to another piece. Can I have another one? Okay. She then sat on top of my drying rack and twirled her feet in the air, as if she truly enjoyed the taste of my jerky. She frowned at how salty it was at first, hating it. But now she kept on chewing with a completely satisfied look on her face. Ah, just what is this feeling? I'm feeling some type of way. It felt like that unique satisfaction you get when you're feeding a cute pet. Wait, did I just become a cat mom? What is this addictive feeling all of a sudden? No, I frantically shook my head. Get it together, this is Lucy Mariel. She was a key character in Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster. Nothing good would come out of getting involved with her. It was too salty at first, but now I actually really like it because it's salty. It's quite a sensational taste. This salty taste, I love it. Ah, I understood it now. Lucy Mariel was an unprecedented genius with overwhelmingly high grades among the first years. This meant she must be living in Ophelis Hall where they allowed only the best students to stay. Ophelis Hall boasted of having the best facilities among the 3 major dormitories in Sylvania. You couldn't stay at Ophelis without either a high status or a high grade. Therefore, the student cafeteria at Ophelis Hall only served the best food from the best chefs in the kingdom. The taste was often sophisticated and refined, suited for high-ranking nobles. But there was a taste that such high-quality food cannot offer. The salty, spicy, sweet combo. A taste outside the realm of a sophisticated palate that only cared about the freshness of ingredients, the harmony of tastes, and a balanced nutrition. It was a provocative taste that didn't care about one's health. It was like a whisper from the devil. Can I take all of this? No, that would be crossing the line. That's my lunch, you kid. You. I felt sad at seeing her disappointed face. But it may just be a snack to her, but it was my means to survive. She could just eat a lot of the high-quality food back at Ophelis Hall. Suddenly, I had a brilliant idea. Come to think of it, Lucy was indifferent to hardships, and she wasn't afraid of anyone in the academy. The benevolent Princess Peenia, the golden daughter Lortel, and the renowned evil Professor Glast, they were all equals to Lucy who had a carefree soul. But that didn't mean there was no one who could control the unpredictable Lucy. I actually heard the Ophelis Hall maids were looking for you. Lucy's face turned blue as soon as she heard those words. And with a kick that pushed her off into the air, she disappeared in an instant. Then she reappeared right back and flew into the shelter to grab her wide-brimmed witch hat. I think I have to go. Okay, good luck. I'll come again later. No, please don't come back. But before I go, I have something to say. She asked me to tell you. I already wasted too much time with Lucy. I was in the middle of preparing to wash the casual clothes I need to wear tomorrow. Lucy pointed at the forest. What? I looked in the direction Lucy was pointing, but there was nothing but trees. That wolf that's the size of a house, it keeps on watching over you. Goosebumps ran down my back in an instant. There was a whole realm not yet visible to me as someone who hadn't trained my spirit resonance just yet. Someday, by all means, please save Yennecar. And then Lucy disappeared again, leaving me with that message as if it was nothing. I slowly turned my head back to where Lucy was pointing to. It was filled with the sound of crickets crying through the overgrown trees. Other than that, there was nothing else I could see. Announcement. There will be a joint combat class for the first and second year students. Please check your assigned group through the distributed list. Who? Students enrolled in the Intro to Basic Cooperative Combat class and the Advanced Cooperative Combat class at the Where? Common Combat Training Facility in the Nail Hall. Participation from the Alchemy Department students is too low. It's great to practice alchemy, but please participate in common classes as well. Professor Claire Elfin, Assistant Professor of Combat Practice. The announcement was made during the second-year students' meeting at the Student Center the next day. Was it already time for the joint combat class? Things were progressing quite fast. This was the event where Yennecar Polarover first appeared in the game. Apart from the monster battle that would take place, this was where the second-year political drama began. What would happen was quite obvious, given the circumstances. Both combat and politics were important variables in this world. One must always keep an eye on them. Anyhow, I wasn't able to get a proper look at Taylor since I was called to the dean's office last time. But since this was a joint combat class, I would definitely be able to see the faces of the main characters from the first years. It was an opportunity for me to check if the story was moving along properly and if nothing had been changed. I stretched my stiff shoulders as I walked out of the student center, aching from staying up all night trimming my arrows. I would continue living this hellish lifestyle, but humans were adaptable creatures. I could feel that my body had somehow started to adjust. It would be nice if I could significantly raise my vitality stat. But I was sure everything would work out well in the end. I was even able to think of such hopeful thoughts for quite a bit. Chapter 14, Joint Combat Practice 1. The first and second year students' joint combat class may seem like a normal event, but it actually had a fair amount of importance in the story. That's because this event was when Taylor would first hold a sword. Taylor had only previously learned hand-to-hand combat in accordance with the combat department's curriculum. But in this event, he cut down Lazy Lucis' lightning attack with a sword. Taylor had been born with a talent for swordsmanship. And for him who hadn't realized he had such a talent and had only been training in bare-handed martial arts, this event was a turning point in his life. He was paired with Lucy Mariel, whose own talent hadn't fully bloomed yet. Taylor succeeded in cutting down Lucis' lightning attack, catching her. However, in doing so, Lucy broke one of the rules which only allowed the use of elemental magic. This earned Lucy a disqualification and earned Taylor the win. Through the duel, Taylor confirmed his talent as a swordsman and his name began to circulate among the entire first-year students. Despite having received that dreadful ending blow and only winning due to a technicality, it was still true that he did beat Lucy Mariel. And since there hadn't been any big changes yet, things would probably go according to the original story, right? A long-awaited weekend. It was an opportunity to take care of all the things I couldn't get done during the school week. I discovered there was a lot more room for food than I had thought. Hunting became more efficient after I became more proficient to a certain extent. But the most crucial thing was I learned how to set up hunting traps. Newly crafted product. Snare trap. A trap installed by tying a rope obtained from the construction site of the Ulrin Hall to an elastic tree trunk. Effective at catching small animals. Production difficulty level 2. Production completed. Production skills have increased. Despite it being hurriedly made through following the instructions I found in a survival guide I borrowed from the library, it turned out better than I expected. My production skills had gone up and my woodworking skill had almost reached level 10. Above all else, traps were time efficient. Even when I was attending my classes throughout the day, the traps were there, doing their job. After every school day, all I had to do was go around the places I left traps at and collect the wild animals dangling from the trees. At first, all I could get were small creatures like tree squirrels and rabbits, but I would hit the jackpot sometimes and get something like a raccoon. Of course, more often than not, the rope would rip, or the jerky I left as bait would be gone. But considering how little labor was required once every trap was set, it was still an advantageous method. And with establishing this dual method of procuring food through direct hunting and using traps, I was able to obtain more than enough meat. It had come to a point where hunting wasn't the problem, rather, it was the hard labor involved in cleaning the animals. But even then, it was a problem to be happy about. I was also able to raise my standards of living quite a bit. My level of production used to be limited to the materials I could gather from the forest. But ever since school started, I had been able to pick up discarded items from classrooms and the various ongoing construction sites across campus. Through that, I obtained different types of materials that couldn't be found in the forest. There were several buildings currently being built under the support of the Golden Daughter, Lortel. Thanks to her, there were quite a few construction sites on the outskirts of the academy. Snooping around earned me various construction materials. I was able to obtain leftover lumber, shabby and rusty nails, and ropes of ambiguous length. But my best find was a hand axe. Crack, crack, the sound of smashing firewood resonated through the forest. I was using the base of a tree I had cut as my workbench to cut firewood. It may be worn out, but this discarded axe that the construction workers no longer used was my best find this month. Thank you to the manual laborers who left this lying around. I feel like crying. Phew, this is quite hard. I cut the logs into large pieces with wind blade, and then I cut them vertically with the hand axe. My wind blade was just at a beginner level and wasn't powerful enough to cut down a whole tree. Because of this, I had actually been using small stems to maintain my campfire. But because their sizes were all different, and some even had moisture left in them, their efficiency and effectiveness weren't great. But now, if I were to use actual proper firewood, then my efficiency in managing the fire would increase tremendously. It was a pain to constantly take care of the campfire. And it was so crucial too, as I needed the heat at night to make sure no nearby wild animals would come close. It always needed constant maintenance. But the fire never lasted long due to the poor kindlings I had been using. There were even cases when it would waft in acrid smoke into the shelter after it had burned out. It was hard enough to find time to sleep during the day, and yet I would still lose sleep at night. Phew, look at all this sweat. My casual clothes were already soaked in sweat. I would usually wash my casual clothes twice a day during weekends. Gathering herbs and edible plants, hunting, preparing my daily necessities, or even just inspecting the camp, every single moment of my life had become a series of aerobic exercises. There was never a day I was not sweating. I went back to the stream to wash myself off. Even though I was a few meters away, seeing my camp warmed my heart. I felt a sense of pride from seeing its appearance improve bit by bit. Quote. However, I had been getting a certain uninvited guest a lot recently. I let out a sigh at seeing Lucy sleeping sluggishly on a flat rock by the stream. Ever since that first day, Lucy would often come by my camp and take a nap whenever she wanted. There was no sense of regularity to her visits. It seemed she just came by whenever she felt like it. Hello. Even though we were not fully acquainted, we ended up greeting each other whenever she ran into me before she would go to sleep. Then she would be gone the next moment. I wanted to avoid getting close to an important character like Lucy Mariel at first, but I eventually stopped thinking about it after a few days. I mean, Lucy Mariel's visits were akin to natural disasters. I was in the middle of doing all my piled up work this weekend. I didn't really have the capacity to waste any energy trying to get rid of a stray cat. And it wasn't like she was causing any harm. She would just lay down and sleep. Often, she would eat a couple of jerkies, and then she would leave when she wanted to. I just thought of her as a background piece. She widened her radius of actions around the camp too. She would sometimes sleep on top of trees or on the rocks by the stream, under the sun. She seemed to really like the stream a lot. Recently, I laid down dried leather from martens and squirrel furs as flooring in my shelter, and she made a fuss about liking how fluffy it was. Somehow, it really did feel like I was raising a cat. Z's. I walked past Lucy to wash my face in the stream. The face, reflected on the surface of the water, looked completely wiped out from cutting all that firewood. I soaked my hands in the cool water to wet my face. Then I realized I hadn't checked my stats recently. What? Yugok. My scream woke Lucy up, and she ended up rolling off the rock. Name: Ed Roths Taylor. Gender: male. Age: 17. School year: 2nd. Species: human. Achievements: none. Vitality: 5. Intelligence: 5. Dexterity: 9. Willpower: 7. Luck: 6. Combat skills details. Magic skills details. Life skills details. Alchemy skills details. Hi, Ed. You look happy today. Did something good happen? Of course, there was. I had been steadily increasing my proficiency in both woodworking and magic, which had raised my dexterity stat and intelligence stat respectively. But that wasn't what was important. My vitality stat had gone up a whole 2 points. What did this mean? It meant that my training had finally opened this damn body up, which wasn't born with any physical ability. Although it would have been weirder had it not gone up at all, given how much physical work I had been doing all this month. However, this body wasn't born with any proper muscle strength, agility, or endurance. And no matter how much I trained, there had been no change in my vitality, so it was actually starting to break my heart. So I couldn't believe that it actually rose a whole 2 points. A wall that had been persistently blocking me had just broken down. I had now entered the next stage. From here on out, I would hope to be able to grow even further. How could I not be happy? But of course, there was no way I could show my happiness on the outside. What? Not really. After the lecture, we students began to leave Professor Hella's introductory elemental class one by one. Even though I had been replying as coldly as possible to Yenikara, she still kept on talking to me with a smile on her face, just like usual. Hey, Ed. You know about tomorrow's practical combat class? It's with the first years. And the groups have already been decided. Isn't it so nerve-wracking when you think about seeing them? I'm still not used to being an upperclassman, for some reason. Haha. So tomorrow was already the practical class. I had no choice but to participate because it was mandatory. Just as the name implied, the joint combat class was a simulated one-on-one combat training. Of course, students wouldn't actually use real weapons or powerful magic. Students from the combat department were going to use fake weapons, while students from the magic department were only allowed to use beginner elemental magic. And those from the alchemy department were not allowed to use overly powerful drugs or spiritual skills. We wouldn't really be doing any sort of collaboration even though we were put in groups. It was a list of matches, more than anything. We were to conduct one-on-one practical battles according to the randomly created match schedule with the mixed years. Of course, these battles were to take place with everyone watching. The complete randomness of the placements allowed for various match combinations. A first-year versus first-year battle would be a good opportunity for inexperienced underclassmen to show off their skills while still getting advice from the upper years. A first-year versus second-year battle, on the other hand, would be a good opportunity for the first years to experience a more masterful battle through direct combat. Lastly, a second-year versus second-year battle would be a good opportunity for the first years to see the level of combat and magic skills they should be aiming for. The point was to watch all the battles. From what I could remember, all the important characters in the story would participate in this class. The class size was so large because everyone was supposed to participate regardless of their department. The benevolent Princess Pinia, the golden daughter Lortel, the spear from nature Ziggs, the elementalist Yenikara, hard worker Amilla, lazy Lucy, gloomy Clevius, romantic Adele. There were an endless amount of characters. But the most important person was the failed swordmaster Taily. I already roughly knew the match list, which meant I knew who would win and who would lose. And even though frustrating, the first years would win almost every battle. The purpose of the joint class was for the first years to learn from the second years, but the first years were full of important characters that completely slaughtered the upperclassmen. Seeing Professor Glast applauding with a satisfied look on his face sure was a spectacle. But what could they do? If they were unhappy, then they should have been the main characters, haha. Although there was one second year who won against a main character from the first year. Yenikara Polarover completely overwhelmed the golden daughter Lortel. To be fair, she herself was the final boss of Act 1, and this practical class was the first time she would appear in the story. Ed, do you want to take a look? Yenakara handed me the list of matches with a big smile on her face. No, it's fine. I'll check it later, was what I was going to say to keep my distance. But then I became curious about who my opponent would be. Since I shouldn't even exist in the story at this point, I was worried there would be a big change in the match list due to me intervening. Most of the first years participating in this class were important characters in the story. I had been keeping my distance from such main characters, but this is the one time it couldn't be helped if I were to become their opponent. It wasn't like there was anything I could do given the nature of the class. So I should just stay calm and deal with whoever my opponent was. Let's see. Oh, right here. Here you are. Come look. Yenakar cheerfully handed me the list of matches, as if happy she had finally heard a proper response from me for once. Thankfully, there were no big changes. Most of them were still the matches I remember. All except for one. Match 13, Ed Roth's Taylor vs. Penia Elias Crowell. That name sounded familiar. Quote. No, oh, my, God. Quote. It shouldn't have been her. The royal residence was abuzz with the news. It seemed that newly stocked high-end clothes in the business district were in fashion. Products distributed by the Elk Company were selling like hotcakes. Princess Penia was not very pleased by this. That fox-like merchant scheme. I can see it clearly, but Princess Penia used her insightful eyes to gauge others, and they told her of the golden daughter Lortel's slyness inside of her. This was something unpleasant to the princess. She was one of the 3 Class A students recognized by Professor Glast from the class assignment exam. Lortel Kehaland was the only child of the best merchant on the continent and was a girl as sly as her father. She appeared to always be polite and upright, but she was actually hiding her true calculating nature of weighing everything on a scale of profit. The princess sat on her magnificent bed and sighed. Even this sacred place of learning was nothing more than a means to make money for Lortel. She wasn't using her magic talent, nor her outstanding brain capable of photographic memory, to study. The princess could feel it with her 6th sense. The Elk Company was gradually trying to take control of Sylvania's distribution channels, which was not completely irrelevant to the princess. I really don't like her, but I can't just deal with this only using my personal feelings. The princess buried herself in all sorts of magic books, documents, and bags scattered on her bed. Again and again, I keep thinking about the kingdom and politics, even though it's been a while since I've been here. But no matter how magnificent her royal residence may be, it would never match up to the actual thing. If she were at the castle, she wouldn't be able to lie down on her bed like this, nor would she be allowed to lay her reference books and documents all over her bed. Doing such inappropriate acts helped her feel like she was rebelling, but it also made her feel a sense of self-deprecation. And yet, it also made her feel a strange sense of satisfaction, as was only human. The princess stretched her body once again while smiling bitterly. Phew, all right, the most important thing is to develop myself through learning. With that in mind, she checked the notice distributed to the first years. She had to carefully check everything related to that class. But after seeing the assigned groups for the joint combat practice, she buried herself in her bed once again. This is just like the last time, this strange ill-fated relationship. After agonizing for 3 days and 3 nights on whether to try and urge Ed Roth's tailor to leave the school, the princess ended up putting it on hold. Instead, she asked the head of her royal knights, Claire, and the dean of the magic department, Dean McDowell, to keep an eye on him. This was because he was an unusual person that the princess couldn't look through with her insightful eyes. She pushed back dealing with him as the semester started, and with her getting caught up in all sorts of things. But he was someone she couldn't just ignore. A man with a lot of unknowns. But he didn't seem to have any excellent talent with magic. The princess would probably win without much trouble. There's no reason to be worrying so much. She decided to go to sleep as she was on her soft bed. She didn't even take off her school uniform properly, nor did she organize her books scattered about. The first thing she wanted to do was relieve her fatigue. Of course, this was something unimaginable as part of the royal family. There were so many things she needed to pay attention to. Even though all Emperor Crowell wanted was for her to let everything go and just enjoy the joys of learning. He wanted her to ignore the kingdom and its politics and just enjoy her life as a student. But that simple task was too difficult for a young royal such as herself. This was the fate of a monarch, after all. Chapter 15, Joint Combat Practice 2. I didn't know who came up with the term, butterfly effect, but I thought the concept behind it was amazing. The small fluttering of a butterfly's wings could cross oceans and cause a hurricane that could devour buildings on the other side of the world. It was in accordance with the chaos theory, which stated that there were too many natural variables in the world for us to actually control the future. Even the slightest change in a variable could have an exponential effect on the outcome of reality. To put it simply, it was like a snowball rolling down a mountain. No matter how insignificant it may be at the top, it could eventually have an unexpectedly big result once it reaches the bottom. Just like the words of the wise said, you shouldn't try to control everything in the world as you wish. I never thought I would realize the weight of those words in this joint combat practice class. As expected, old sayings were never wrong. Nail Hall had traditionally been used for joint combat classes as one of the 3 buildings in the student center. It was a well-designed Colosseum-style arena where all the spectator seats, as well as the floor, were always polished clean and smooth. Of course, even the training ground for sparring and fighting in an academy for the nobility would be made with such dignity. I was sitting in one of these spectator seats while I watched the mock combat practice happening in the center of the Colosseum. Usually, there would only be 1 or 2 gems in each year, but this year's batch of freshmen was like a sky full of bright stars. This meant the second years were bound to be focused, watching the whole time. Among these stars were the 3 students recognized by the strict Professor Glast, Spear from Nature Ziggs, Golden Daughter Lortel and Lazy Lucy. Everyone's attention was completely focused on these 3 freshmen from the magic department. Bang! Thank you for the great experience. I was deeply impressed by your experienced management of magic. I learned something from you today, so thank you for that. Down the center was Ziggs, a descendant of the northern nomadic people, who was in the midst of throwing a second year off the stage with his wind magic. His long curly hair that reached the nape of his neck waved in the aftermath. I hope I can learn something from you again next time. He politely gave his greetings. At any rate, this guy wasn't out of his mind. The second-year magic department student who went up against Zig, what was his name? Was it Michael? Anyway, he couldn't pull himself up together, so the staff had to carry him out. Using non-beginner magic was not allowed. But if it was, Zig's magic skills far exceed the level of beginner magic spells. I was certain he could have shown a much stronger performance had he been allowed to use higher levels of magic. The second years began to gossip amongst themselves. The first years won again. At this rate, won't all the second years lose? This year's freshmen are an odd bunch. How did all these monsters end up together in one batch? The joint combat practice was an annual event, but the results this year were terrible. The second years were mercilessly overshadowed by the first years. We were already halfway through the matches, and it felt like the second years were nothing but punching bags for the first years so they could show off their skills. It was quite a sad scene. The students whose names are called, please proceed to the waiting room after your preparations. Lucy Mariel, Taylor McClure. The time has finally come. The match the people were most interested in. The audience began to whisper amongst themselves. It's finally here. I adjusted my posture and shifted my focus completely on the stage. Everyone would probably be focused solely on Lucy, the extraordinary genius who was touted to rewrite the history of Sylvania Academy. But this was nothing more than a storytelling technique to bring attention to the real main character through reversing expectations. The real focus here was Taylor McClure, the protagonist of this world who was born fated to become a swordsman. Even though he had never held a sword in his life before, he would be able to cut down Lucy's lightning-fast magic. Taylor would use that gap in her carelessness to close the distance. And Lucy, having been caught off guard, would use the intermediate lightning magic lightning strike to hit Taylor. Taily would be completely overpowered by Lucy's instinctive magic, but since she had used an intermediate spell, Lucy would get disqualified and Taily would be honored the win. This is to remind first-year student Lucy Mariel to please finish your preparations and come up to the arena. Ah, it was a really great scene. All his life, Taily had constantly been treated and told that he wasn't talented. Even after getting accepted into Sylvania, he was still treated as a failure. From getting bullied by a guy like Ed Roth's Taylor to always getting failing scores in his combat class, Taily's life truly was full of ordeals. But Taily never stopped training. And this match was the moment when he felt like everything he had done until then had finally been rewarded. The directing of the scene was so dramatic. The close-up shot of him crying while looking at his childhood friend Ayla was truly heartbreaking to witness. I repeat, first-year student Lucy Mariel. First-year student Lucy Mariel. Please finish preparing for your battle and come up to the arena. ... Question mark. First-year Lucy Mariel. I repeat, first-year Lucy Mariel. Please come up to the arena. Lucy Mariel. What's going on? Where the hell did that girl go? It was hard to describe the strange sense of euphoria I felt the moment I saw Taily in the arena. Even though it had only been through a screen, I had lived as him several times. From the miserable bad ending to the unforgettable true ending, I had lived through his life and journeys. I also couldn't help but think of all the hardships that lie ahead of him. Although he was born fated to be a swordsman, his life wasn't always destined for success. Among the many routes in his life he could take, there wasn't a single path that wasn't difficult. So I decided to cheer him on. I had planned on taking care of my life and living it to the fullest, while he would be the one to step in and take care of all the ordeals that would befall Sylvania. I will do my best with all the power that I have. A round of applause and encouragement greeted Taily's strong declaration on stage. Yes, you could probably call it encouragement, because everyone in the arena believed he would get destroyed by Lucy Mariel. What they didn't know was that Taily actually possessed the most overwhelming talent among all the students in the academy. As someone who already knew how the whole story would go, I expected the public's opinion to change in the future. Well, there's that. And then there was this. What was I even doing right now? I pinched both of Lucy Mariel's cheeks. Lucy got bored pretending to listen to the class, so she ended up looking for a place to take a nap. She somehow found her way to the spare podium behind the center stage of the arena. It wouldn't have been a good idea to completely leave Nail Hall, so she probably thought that the spare podium was a good enough place to take a nap in. I found her there, curled up and sleeping. Agik, hey, wake up already. It's your turn. She took a while to wake up, but Lucy finally sat up from underneath the podium. She had the same blank face as she would normally have after waking up at my camp. Even her tangled hair, one side of it was tied down while the other had come undone. There wasn't even any room for her hair to stick on her cheeks. And the words she said the moment she woke up were the same as well. ... I'm hungry. She brushed her hair and stretched some more. Then she looked at me and said her usual greetings. Hello. And then she asked oh so casually and naturally. Do you have any beef jerky? I seriously wanted to hit her in the head. I do. Give me some. Finish your duel first. First-year student Lucy Mariel. Please hurry and come on up. It was bizarre to see one of the dueling opponents pop out from under the podium. Everyone in the audience, including the assistant professor who was in charge, watched Lucy with a puzzled face. The important thing was she didn't ditch class and run outside of Nail Hall. This meant they could still have the duel. For a moment, I was afraid the duel would get cancelled and completely change Taily's fate. Lucy stood up and the messy half of her hair completely fell off its hair tie, her neatly tied hair falling apart. ... Lucy gathered the hair that had escaped and picked up the tie. Then she handed it over to me and, in a drowsy voice, said something utterly ridiculous. Please tie my hair. No, just leave it untied and go quickly. No way. If I just leave it like this, the Ophelis Hall maids will scold me. They're way too scary. The maid of Ophelis Hall were the only people whom Lucy, someone who had even tried to compete with Headmaster Obel, feared. The only reason why Lucy had been able to maintain a neat appearance despite sleeping whenever was thanks to the maids of Ophelis Hall. They were a group of elite maids trained to serve all kinds of nobles, but even such professionals couldn't seem to control this unpredictable stray cat. They probably couldn't help but get angry and scold Lucy for her actions. But it was a relief they could at least still somehow control her. I sighed as I grabbed Lucy's hand and sat her down. I held her hair tie as I gathered up her wayward hair, and then tied it neatly to match the other side. I was supposed to duel with Princess Peenia later, but it was ridiculous how I had to interfere with someone else's duel. And everyone in Nail Hall was watching the whole spectacle. What's with that person? Isn't that Ed Roth's tailor? He still attends school. Wow, he's quite stubborn, huh? What's with him? He's having a grand old time with the first-year top student just like that. They look close. Are you sure that's close? Isn't he acting more like her guardian? I knew it was quite a sight to see the most disgraceful second-year student and the most honorable top first-year student nagging each other over fixing her hair. It made me feel embarrassed, so I finished tying it up quickly. Then Lucy stood up, still half asleep, and I also fixed her overcoat for her. Then I tucked the hem of her shirt back inside her skirt and tightened it well, and even straightened her messy collar. I then fixed up her falling knee socks and re-tied her hair again so she would look somewhat presentable. Her sleeves were a bit long, but she never really cared about the size of her uniform and only wore whatever she received. You're good. Yeah, all right. Hurry up and go out there. I shoved Lucis back and pushed her up to the stage. And she stood there, across from Taylor, yawning loudly, as if everything in the world was annoying. Then the duel will start. Bang. With a single blow, right in the middle of Taylor's chest, Lucy hit him with low-level lighting magic. It all happened in about 0.3 seconds. Taylor McClure's life had always been a series of ordeals. Born as a country bumpkin, he was a failure of a student who had never performed well since entering the academy, a loser who had never been recognized by anyone. Apart from his childhood friend Ayla, nobody had ever believed in Taylor ever since he was a kid. No matter what he did, his results were always below average, that even his family had slowly begun to turn their backs on him. But then a chance to forget everything had come. For Taylor, his admission into Sylvania Academy was a means to prove himself. It was as if God had finally smiled down on him. He barely managed to pass the written test after staying up night after night studying. He even almost failed his practical test because of a despicable upperclassman. But thanks to the mercy of Princess Peenia, he was able to pass. And not only that, he had somehow overcome all the other hardships and challenges that kept on coming his way once the semester started. He almost lost his life to an accidentally summoned monster-type kobold during the placement test. Then he couldn't attend the opening ceremony because of some classmates who had kept him out, calling him a failure of a student. But thanks to the unwavering support of his childhood friend Ayla, along with Aiden, another student who was also in danger of failing classes, Taylor was somehow able to endure it. And right now, this was the moment to prove it. Not only to the first years, but also to the upperclassmen and even the professors, all of whom couldn't help but be in awe at the extraordinarily rare genius that was Lucy Mariel. He was in a brutal situation where everyone expected him to lose. But even in this moment full of despair, Taylor never lost hope. Lucy wasn't someone he could beat with just meager efforts. Despite all the ridicule he received from his classmates, Taylor stayed up all night, training his body, swinging his fists, and constantly training in hand-to-hand combat. Even until this moment, when everyone believed he would lose, Taylor never stopped putting in the effort to try and win. And right now, before he could even react, a single blow of magic had struck him and left him hanging off the wall of the stadium. Cuck, huke, uke. Nevertheless, Taylor stood up. Scattered around him were all kinds of weapons, from bows to swords to whips. They were mock weapons prepared for the students of the combat department. Most of them had no blades and were modified to be blunt. Taylor looked at the knuckles in his hand. They were a weapon that had been with him for a long time. But today, he quietly took them off. A sense that struck like lightning went through Taylor's mind. He saw a shabby wooden sword amongst the scattered weapons. His body jumped out of instinct and picked up the broken sword from the floor. Then he got into position, his body covered in wounds. It was the first time he had ever picked up a sword in his life. His opponent was an extremely rare genius magician whom everyone was in awe of. Nevertheless, Taylor stood up with the support of his 2 legs. There were people who believed in him. Taylor had to repay them for that. Taylor clenched his teeth with that single thought in mind. He picked up a sword. I held my breath the moment I saw Taylor hanging off the wall, but clenched my fist as soon as he grabbed the sword. That's right, you could do it. Lucy Mariel. Taylor shouted out Lucy's name with a fiery voice. Even I, who was only watching from the audience, felt that something was going to happen. That's right. This was the scene right here. The scene where Taylor, who never gave up despite destiny abandoning him, dealt with all the challenges and trials the world threw at him. This was the scene where he sends a signal of his revival. This was the cry of a swordsman who didn't give up on his life, and would always be engraved into the hearts of all the students. It was this moment. Hiya. His movements were not of someone who was holding a sword for the first time. There was a sensation of mana engraved on the low-grade wooden sword in Taylor's hands. That was a sensation allowed only to those who were fated to be a swordsman. It was the energy of aura. Even a thick wall of several layered stacks of mana could be cut like paper. The students in the audience began to become overwhelmed by his vigor. It was a sign that Taylor had clearly changed. All the students held their breath. They couldn't help but anticipate that something extraordinary was about to happen. But then an unknown wind blew past. And with a sudden gale that swooped in for no reason, Taylor's body began to float in the air in an instant. Bang! In the ensuing lighting magic, Taylor was struck again and thrown against the wall. This time, it took about 0.5 seconds. It was a perfect knockdown this time. A cloud of thick smoke billowed out, and beneath it all was Taylor's body, completely covered in wounds. Hyung. Lucy Mariel rubbed her eyes while stretching her body lazily. Good work. Lucy came down off the stage, carefree as can be, as if she had done an annoying trivial task. The audience was still completely silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on her. Lucy bounced her way over to me and ignored it all, as if nothing had happened. Then she grabbed my collar, her face blank, and started bothering me again. Can you give me the beef jerky now? Meanwhile, I came to a realization. The wind magic that Lucy used during the duel looked to be beginner wind magic at first glance, but she didn't use it on her own. I knew what magic it was, magic that could momentarily constrain the opponent's movement and create a gap by breaking the balance. It was Storm's Blessing, a skill that can only be acquired by signing a contract with the high-ranking wind spirit Merelda. It hadn't been a long time since Lucy had started coming to my camp. A few days at most. She always looked tired and would take naps, yet she was able to sign a contract with a high-ranking wind spirit. Merelda and Lucy were completely separated in the original storyline. They never got involved with each other because Lucy never had any reason to visit the northern forest. Does this mean she had been able to make contact with Merelda because she had been staying at my camp? And through that, she was able to use Merelda's blessing, inadvertently becoming unnecessarily stronger. That's just. No one could ever imagine signing a contract with a high-ranking wind spirit in just a few days. Quote. I looked towards where Taylor was. He had dropped his sword and sat there, collapsed with his head down. The life that was normally in his eyes was no longer there. The overwhelming gap in their talent must have felt like violence. The realization that a huge wall existed between the both of them, his heart must have broken in an instant. This was, I think I may be in big trouble. I quickly stood up from my seat. I couldn't just leave him there like that. I pushed away Lucy who was sticking to me and walked over to Taylor who was coming down from the stage in total despair. The next contenders in the combat practice are Ed Roth's Taylor and the Honorable Princess Peenia Elias Crowell. Meanwhile, my name was already being called. I saw Princess Peenia in the audience, neatly arranging her clothes and standing up. I ran into the princess on my way to the arena a while ago. Her eyes became aggressive the minute she saw him, just like usual. The fact that she was hostile towards me was nothing new. She seemed to have already made up her mind when it came to me. But Princess Peenia was not my concern at this moment. Ed Roth's tailor, last time, you. I walked past her just as the princess started to say something. Taily would have completely left if I were to stay still. The act of ignoring the words of the princess of the nation was an unpardonable sin, but here in the academic district, the virtue of learning precedes one's status, so I wouldn't have to face capital punishment, at the very least. After all, there was something more important than that. I left behind the princess who completely looked shocked at having been ignored. I saw Taily just as he was disappearing amongst the crowd and shouted out towards him. Hey, Taily, I don't know if this would make any difference, but it was better than staying still. Your efforts will be rewarded. Don't be discouraged. Hey, straighten your back. There's nothing to be ashamed of. If Taily's heart was broken and he became completely discouraged, there was a high chance that I would likely suffer as a result. I couldn't just leave him like that. Walk with confidence. You did a good job. This was only because your opponent was too good. Don't be discouraged by something like this. Please don't be disheartened, Taily. You were destined to go through all the hardships. There were going to be so many challenges and trials that would arise in this academy in the future. I didn't want to be the one to do the saving. I kept shouting words of encouragement and support as Taily slowly walked away and completely disappeared into the crowd. It was pure desperation from the bottom of my heart. Chapter 16, Joint Combat Practice 3. Peenia, you were born with God's blessing. The first person to recognize Peenia's insightful eyes was her father, Emperor Crowell. An emperor's life was nothing but an endless parade of secret battles and conspiracies. And since her father only ever showed his honorable side to the public, no one could have ever guessed how dirty was the darkness he was hiding. And the emperor was wrong about Peenia's insightful eyes. It was not a present from God. It was something she had acquired from trying to protect herself from a depressing abyss. She had complete confidence in her ability. She had been able to read the Chancellor's eyes, filled with intent to poison her aunt. She had seen the Duchess's desire to turn her son into royalty. She had glimpsed the trembling eyes of a worker trying to steal a golden chain from the bedroom, and had heard the unstable footsteps of a leader who tried to embezzle the knight's armament funds. She had even felt the gaze of a young royal who was jealous of her power, and noticed the trembling voice of a spy disguised as a maid to collect information. Oh, the princess knew of the dark abyss underneath every royal's gaze that looked up to her benevolence. But despite knowing everybody's darkest secrets, she had always led her life acting as if she knew nothing. I look forward to working with you. She looked straight at the boy who greeted her so politely. The princess had a unique level of sixth sense. A higher level of intuition than her would require mind reading. Ha ha ha, what's with him? Isn't that Ed Roth's tailor? He was always wearing fancy clothes and jewelry, but now, he looks like a peasant. That frugal appearance suits him quite well. He was always arrogant, but it's finally going to be revealed he actually has no talent in magic. The students' whispers could be heard all the way down to the arena. It seemed they wanted to mock and belittle Ed as much as they could, but couldn't because they had to behave in front of the princess of the kingdom. Yes, I look forward to working with you as well. She gently raised her hand and felt the flow of her magic, her condition at its best. One of the important characteristics of an impressive archmage was to always take care of one's body. She narrowed her eyes at the boy across from her. Your efforts will be rewarded. Don't be discouraged. Hey, straighten your back. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Walk with confidence. You did a good job. This was only because your opponent was too good. Don't be discouraged by something like this. Ed Roth's tailor shouted at the student who was in danger of failing the class, all the while ignoring her, the princess of the nation. But rather than be surprised that he disrespected her, what surprised the princess more was the urgency in Ed's voice. Did you hear him yelling at Taily earlier? He's seriously quite stubborn. Even after bullying him earlier this year, he's still making a fuss. He really should stop picking on that weakling. Maybe he just wanted to try and act nice. Something like, at least I'm helping him now, even though I bullied him before. Maybe he's thinking something like that. Wow, his intentions are quite shady then. Wasn't he someone like this in the first place? The audience's words could no longer be considered whispering. Even the princess could hear them all the way down where she was. There was no way Ed Roth's tailor hadn't heard them. But his eyes remained calm. His pupils didn't even tremble one bit. It was easy for the princess to read his emotions through his eyes. Indifference, apathy, but otherwise good. It was a familiar feeling, the same feeling from that time she saw Ed at his camp. Ed had always been this kind of person. The audience's mocking whispers didn't even leave a scratch on his heart. There were many people like Ed. People who tend to have an indifferent attitude, born with calm temperance regardless of what others may say. These were people who believed themselves to be the center of their lives. This firm belief ingrained in their hearts wouldn't be shaken by the will of others. There was no need to look far for such people. The first years were full of them. Students like Lucy Mariel, the Golden Daughter Lortel, and Spear from Nature's Eggs. The princess felt relieved at the thought. Somehow, this made Ed seem more human. It took a while for her to accept it, but he was somehow a level above the princess's insightful eyes. It was why he was able to take his stance with such conviction. However, his puzzling words from earlier and that of ignoring the princess. Ed was wholeheartedly encouraging a first-year student, someone he had tried to fail before. The contrast made the princess feel dizzy. Just when the princess thought she had him figured out, he would do something like this and become like slippery fish that would torment her. Was he yelling at Taylor to make fun of him? Was it all a two-faced stunt to make up for what he did while cheering Taylor on? Without knowing his motivations, his actions did appear to support the audience's speculations. But the princess saw his sincere desperation from a while ago, something he had never shown before. If he had appealed to her the same way back when they met at his camp, then the princess wouldn't have such a headache over him right now. Please don't expel me from school. I'm sincerely reflecting on my actions. Please give me a chance. Had he appealed like that with all his strength, had he fallen on his knees and rubbed his hands together, she wouldn't be feeling so uncomfortable. So many people already bow their heads and desperately appeal in front of her anyway. But he treated his expulsion with indifference, the same way he was taking all the mocking and ridicule from the audience. However, his reaction to the heartbroken first-year student who failed was not indifference but unnatural desperation, something sincere from his heart. You're making me confused, Ed Roth's Taylor. The princess sighed. Was this something to use this much energy on? She was tired of getting swayed by Ed's unpredictable behavior. He was just a student whose nobility was stripped off him. He wasn't someone corrupt, dreaming of overthrowing the royal family. Nor was he a corrupt prime minister embezzling public funds, or a disgraceful staff who tried to steal a royal's wealth. Who cares if her insightful eyes cannot gauge him? Yes, this duel was an opportunity to take care of this once and for all. To end it all here. The princess managed to calm herself down. This was her chance to fight Ed Roth's Taylor, who she couldn't understand at all. I want to end it all cleanly with this duel. There were so many unknown things in this world. As long as there was a simple way to take care of it, it didn't matter. The context of it wasn't important. Just because she couldn't figure him out doesn't mean it's the end of the world. She was already gauging the amount of mana Ed Roth's Taylor had. It wasn't an amazing amount, but the natural way he controlled the flow of his magic meant he wasn't an easy opponent. This was the first march between a second year and a first year. Therefore, a handicap that they could only use beginner-level magic was out in place to even out their fighting power. You could tell that Ed has had a lot of practice using beginner elemental magic by the way he could control the flow of his magic through his body. It was hard to say how much intermediate elemental magic he could use, but he was, at the very least, skilled with beginner magic. The princess's magic skill was not as impressive as Lucis or Lortel. But she had never neglected her magic training due to her diligence. Please start your match now. Princess Peenia got into position. The first strike. It was usually used to measure your opponent's skills. The princess's water elemental magic specialized in anomalous attacks. It wouldn't be easy to respond to the sudden changes in her attack's movements. I'm coming. The princess raised her hand, where the beginner elemental magic water ball was formed. Using magic to form a mass of water was a tricky technique. It could surprise the enemy through his blind spots, applying great pressure. She was capable of summoning up to 5 water balls at once, allowing her to attack from all directions. However, to gauge Ed's skills first, she only summoned one. His elemental magic was wind and fire. How would he respond? The princess planned to change her strategy according to how Ed would react. She was thinking of increasing her magic output little by little, fighting with all of her power. Through this one last dramatic battle, Princess Peenia wanted to forget everything that she could about Ed Rothstaler, an enigma she could not understand. There were so many other things she could pay attention to aside from him. She threw her water ball with all her might, the mass of water changing directions as it soared to attack Ed. The princess saw it. His eyes were following the water ball's path. Would he use wind? How would he defend himself? And after his defense, what should be the follow-up blow? Bang! Her water ball hit Ed right in the abdomen. His body flew through the air before rolling on the floor. A pile of dust rose from where he landed. He had completely fallen, sprawled out on the floor. I lost. What did you say? Princess Peenia's eyes began to tremble. Ha 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 ha. Wow, what the hell was that? He was more useless than Taily. He acted all cool but fell down at once. Princess Peenia, you're so cool. That was amazing. The audience cheered and applauded her win. They sounded extremely happy to see the public enemy fall down, defeated. But that wasn't what it looked like from where the princess stood across from him. Ed Rothstaler's eyes were following her water ball's movement as it flew right into him. It wasn't that he couldn't stop it. It was that he didn't stop it. Just what are you? Great match. Thanks to you, I learned a lesson today, princess. He took off his dueling guards and stood up, meeting her eyes as he gave his greetings. It was then that Princess Peenia realized he hadn't made eye contact with her until now. He never had any interest in their duel from the very beginning. Princess Peenia felt as though something hot was stuck in her throat, and it wouldn't disappear. The uncomfortable feeling she tried to shake off through this fight had now started to swallow her whole. Was this really the time for a duel? I quickly walked off the arena as fast as I could. The childish mockery and ridicule the students welcomed me with today, it must have been great to see me get knocked down so easily after one shot from the princess. Taily, where did that guy go? There was a prioritized order for everything. And everything had a set level of importance. It was important to minimize the impact as carefully as possible when in contact with Princess Peenia. This was so I wouldn't affect the story as the princess was an extremely important person in the game. But Taily, as the main character of this world, was even more important than the princess. If he were to completely succumb to this ordeal and get disheartened, it would form a fatal flaw in my grand plan of taking advantage of him so I could graduate. I had to do something no matter what. It didn't matter how important of a person the princess was. She couldn't be more important than having Taily move past this. Anyways, finding Taily is my first priority. Leaving behind their taunts and mockery, I rushed down the hallway leading to the exit of Nail Hall. The class wasn't over yet, but I should be able to mix well among the crowd and leave unnoticed. As long as I find a way to help Taily come to his senses, I could just work hard to cover for the things that would affect my grades. I took long strikes with that thought in mind, noticing there was another person behind me. Ed Rothstaler. The princess had surprisingly jumped down from the arena and followed me. Her vitality might be low as she was leaning against the wall, catching her breath. I looked back at the princess, puzzled beyond words. Princess Peenia, for you to have come all the way here without your knights. Don't make that face like you don't know anything. Honestly, the princess shouting at me with a voice full of contempt was a bit surprising. Was she ever this kind of character in the game? No, the better question was there even anything that could have made her so mad? Every time, being unsure if it's wrong or right, do you know how frustrating it is to have to measure a person like that? I am not sure what you are talking about. If it's about the duel, I have learned a lesson thanks to you. What do you mean learned a lesson? I could clearly see her clenched fist shaking. She must be seriously angry. Princess Peenia, please, calm down. You never thought of winning from the beginning. All you thought about was getting off the arena as quickly as possible. Princess Peenia, your voice is too loud. The princess was not the type of person to be flustered enough and show it publicly like this. This was completely unexpected, coming from her. Princess Pinia was a royal who hated using her authority to oppress people. She was also a noble who never forgets the value of her dignity at all times. So to put pressure on, shake her fists at, and raise her voice, all without dignity, to someone beneath her power, it went against her own beliefs. And if someone were to see or hear this, the rumors won't be pretty. I tried to calm her down first. It's already hard enough to keep up with my classes, but that fox-like merchant keeps hiding her intentions and is trying to devour the whole academy for her own gain. And Professor Glass's temper isn't getting any better. Meanwhile, people around me kept mentioning the royal laws. Even if I didn't want to, I had to pay attention to them. It's all too difficult. Had she always had this much pent-up anger? But why was she unloading all of this on me? Was it a sin to have a duel with her? I get that she had a lot of built-up frustrations inside of her, but she wasn't going to have all of that explode on me, was she? Princess, please calm down. Ready to be criticized for my insulting actions, I touched the princess's royal body, putting both of my hands on her shoulders and making eye contact. Take a deep breath. As my hands wrapped around her shoulders, the princess took a deep breath. No one would dare touch the princess of this kingdom. But in a situation where it was just the two of us alone, she was probably surprised by my sudden touch. There's no need to get too agitated. Just take a deep breath, in and out. The princess listened and took a few deep breaths, in and out. In such situations, people generally feel uncomfortable after regaining their composure. Princess Pinia realized how undignified she had been acting and covered her face. This was her moment of realization, the embarrassment coming back to her all at once. About earlier, please forget all of it. Great idea. Of course. The princess had her hand covering her face for a while, red from extreme embarrassment. So, was she good now? Could I go now? Yes, I know I have a bad habit of trying to figure out people and piecing together their secret plans, even though I know it's fine to simply ask questions if there are things I'm wondering about. I guess it's because I grew up in the royal family. She started talking about things that nobody asked her about. No, I got it. I'll listen to you some other time and give you my sincere reaction then. Just let me go first. I need to find Taily. That bad habit, I knew I had it, but I couldn't just tell the princess to her face, "Oh, I don't care. Just please let me go. It's urgent. I'm busy." So I had to nod my head for now. I see. Princess, then. So, let me ask you straight. What now? This is what I think. You knew something about the secret darkness within the Roths-Taylor family, or you were hurt by them, so you tried to cut your ties with the whole family. But you needed some type of justification to be excommunicated, so you bullied a student named Taily. Is that correct? The princess continued to talk while keeping eye contact with me. It was quite a sharp deduction. Most of it was wrong, but the reasoning about the dark side of the Roths-Taylor family was correct. I may have mentioned it before, but the head of the Roths-Taylor household, Lord Crepin Roths-Taylor, was studying the magic of immortality with the power of Mebula, an evil god of the mythic age. In the process, many people were sacrificed as experiments. But that was something the princess would directly investigate by mobilizing the academic affairs power vested in her in the second half of the story. That part was still a long way to go. So if you know something about the darkness of the Roths-Taylor family, was there a reason to tell her? I don't know anything about it. ... There's no way. The princess quickly interrupted my answer. Logically, it doesn't make any sense. Why did you just shout at Taily? Why are you encouraging and supporting the person you were trying to get kicked out of school? You didn't hate Taily in the first place, did you? Hey, this kid, why are her questions quite sharp? I was just teasing him. Well, everyone hates me, right? So when I cheered for Taily, I wanted to show them a different side of me. Won't they see that side of me then? Something like that. Anyone can tell that's a lie. No, I'm not lying. I have something that helps me judge another person better than anyone else. It's my pride, my insightful eyes. The princess raised her head and spoke clearly. It was true. The benevolent Princess Pinia was unrivaled when it came to judging people. Even if everyone in the world believed you, I clearly saw through you, even for just a moment. And that moment you encouraged Taylor, you were really desperate. No, I had no choice but to be extremely desperate. I'll be screwed if he gets disheartened. But that was something I couldn't explain to her. Instead, I decided to use the absolute defense strategy that everybody all around the world used. From elementary school students, all the way to grown-ups. I'm serious. Do you have proof? You don't have proof, right? You only have your suspicions, right? No, but it's true, I'm telling the truth. This strategy left no room for an argument. Even if she had her insightful eyes, because I said it wasn't, then it wasn't. If she were to keep bringing it up, she would have no choice but to bring physical evidence. I'm serious, it's the truth. Ah, seriously. At this point, without manner or class, the princess grabbed her hair with both hands, her expression crazy with frustration. She stomped her feet and kept saying the same thing. There was nowhere to relieve her anger and frustration, so she trampled on the pavement. Ah, seriously. Being so close to finding out the truth, only to have it repeatedly escape and run away from her would definitely leave her frustrated enough for steam to come out of her head. Not just for a day or two, but for several weeks. On top of that, her insightful eyes had always allowed her to see through anyone easily. As this was a new experience for her, she was bound to be 2 or 3 times more frustrated and suffocated. But there was nothing I could do. It was my responsibility to make sure the future was stable and moved along as smoothly as possible. If someone else was in my place, would they have been willing to tell her? Chapter 17, Joint Combat Practice 4. Princess Penia's head escort, Claire, difficulty chased after the princess, her charge having jumped off the arena and running towards the exit. The princess barely managed to calm down as she saw Claire approaching. No matter how furious she was, she still had to maintain her royal status. She wasn't in a position to show such undignified behavior in front of her royal knight. I can't give up on how things are currently. She approached me with an ill-tempered look, her anger not having completely subsided. You know something, don't you? Surely, whether you are bearing the weight of it or hiding it, I don't know why you aren't talking, or maybe you're being forced to, but I can tell that there is something. I can't feel any malicious or dark intent inside you, but I think you may be overestimating yourself, princess. Listen carefully. I can't say anything right now because I don't have any evidence, but the princess's bright golden eyes looked straight at me, as expected of a main character. The more I thought about it, the more I remembered just how important of a role Princess Penia and Lucy Mariel had. It was difficult to act appropriately in front of the princess's insightful eyes. Just like how she caught me in my brief moment of desperation earlier, her sharp sixth sense didn't allow for even a moment of carelessness. In Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster, Princess Penia's insightful eyes was just a simple ability that allowed her to know an opponent's next action in advance during battle, or to peek at an opponent's stats. But aside from that, it was treated as nothing more than a plot device. However, living in this reality myself, actually facing her ability in my daily life had caused me much mental anguish. I knew it. It was better to keep as much distance away from the princess as possible. Although it would never happen as she was a main character, I needed to make sure to never become close to her. I felt like I was starting to care too much about it. Of course, I wasn't sure if it would be easy to keep my distance. It would all depend on my effort from now on. How sure are you that you would get your answer as long as you figure out the vague outline of the situation? The princess let out a sigh. She seemed to finally realize how funny and ridiculous this whole situation was. She put her hands on her waist and let out another sigh, finally regaining her composure. Anyway, I'm sorry I yelled and showed disgraceful behavior towards you. She swept her hand over her face, seemingly recalling the terrible way she had acted earlier. Well, even though she was furious, at least the conversation ended with an apology from the princess. The difference in status between us was enormous. If she was even slightly irritated, it could have had catastrophic results for me. This was an unprecedented situation in the first place. Princess Penia had rarely gotten annoyed or angry at others, the reason for which was quite complicated. I knew about some instances in the princess's childhood which made it understandable why she had such an unnaturally altruistic and caring personality. When she was young, she pointed out a slight stain on her teacup. This resulted in a maid she was friendly with getting whipped in the royal garden. The royal family was always conscious of the dangers of being poisoned. So the fact that a stain remained on a piece of tableware for the royal family, and the fact that it even reached the table, was a clear indication that the maid was insincere in her important duty of checking. But that wasn't all. One day, the princess was running around the garden when she fell down, getting a scratch on her skin. That very same day, her head escort was changed. Whenever she was tired or had a minor illness, the royal doctor's complexion would always turn pale. Once, her shoe broke during a royal banquet. The royal tailor personally came to her room and threw his body on the floor, apologizing with tears running down his face. For Princess Peenia, who was born with a graceful personality, all of these were burdensome and only served to put pressure on her. Not a single mistake was allowed on the path of a noble monarch. They must always accept that their own mistakes would be an irreversible disaster for someone else. If the princess herself were to directly express her anger or resentment towards someone, she wouldn't even be able to estimate what kind of disaster she had brought upon them. The benevolent princess was a nickname given to her in tribute to her caring nature. But I knew the truth. That her nickname was nothing but a chain that bound her. But there was nothing I could do for her. I didn't have any reason to. But if there was something that was bothering me, it was that I had become a variable in her worries. It's okay to leave. You've been looking at that door for some time now. You must have something urgent to attend to, right? The princess let me leave as if she had given up. And I was grateful for that. In any case, I knew I shouldn't be here, and yet my existence had given the princess unnecessary stress. It's already hard enough to keep up with my classes, but that fox-like merchant keeps hiding her intentions and is trying to devour the whole academy for her own gain. And Professor Glass's temper isn't getting any better. Meanwhile, people around me kept mentioning the royal laws. Even if I didn't want to, I had to pay attention to them. It's all too difficult. That moment when she lost her rationality and her pent-up feelings surfaced, she was definitely different from the Princess Peenia that I knew. All sorts of incidents would occur in the original story, causing her mind to wear out little by little. But to even include me in there, I was sure she felt as if her head was about to explode. I was worried she may later develop anxiety and affect the story, given how she was already feeling unstable. In which case, I should do whatever I could do, but there was nothing in particular that I could do. I put my hand on the exit and said a few words. No matter what type of burden I may carry, it shouldn't be any heavier than the weight the princess carries. She might think I was being too presumptuous, but this shouldn't end up being too big of a deal. While it's definitely necessary to pay attention to politics and social problems, why don't you try putting your mind at ease? This isn't a place where the royal family needs to establish authority over everything, it's just Sylvania Academy. The princess's eyes widened at my words, even though I didn't say anything too surprising. I'm not sure if you are aware of it, but you look very tired. She lived a life spent looking through others, but she didn't have much experience in someone else being able to see through her. Looking at the utterly stunned expression on the princess's face, I quickly closed the door and ran out. Thankfully, she didn't try to stop me. That was a relief. Anyways, Princess Peenia was a main character. She may be very bothered by my existence now, but after she gets involved in all sorts of incidents in the main story, she would forget about me soon enough. Let's not see each other again. Please. I found Taylor McClure on a wooden bench somewhere in the outskirts of the student center. He was sitting down, tightly clutching the wooden sword he used in the duel. Now that I could see Taylor in the distance, that didn't mean I actually had a plan. But wasn't this a hilarious situation? This wasn't even something one would think of. The third-class villain Ed Roth's Taylor, who verbally abused Taylor McClure and tried to have him kicked out, has now come back to give him some words of encouragement. Wasn't that kind of funny? Because I was so surprised earlier, my body just automatically jumped up and I ended up shouting whatever I could think of at him. But now that I'm thinking calmly, there wasn't anything I could do to encourage Taylor. There was no way he would feel any sense of sincerity no matter what I told him. I thought about what I should do in such an awkward situation as I took each step toward him. But someone blocked my path suddenly. "Don't come any closer." I was so surprised, but after looking at her face, I felt a strange sense of joy rising from within me. She had a short wavy dark brown bob, with a weak appearance but a strong expression on her face showing her will. "You are. Please, don't come any closer." Despite both of her arms visibly shaking, she talked while maintaining eye contact. She looked exactly like she did in the game. If you've played Sylvania's failed swordmaster, even once, you would be glad to see her face. She was practically the face of the game. Taylor's childhood friend who always supported him whenever he was having a hard time or facing a challenge. I didn't expect to see Ayla Triss in the flesh. Ed Roth's Taylor, "Don't come any closer to Taylor. Don't come closer." Her trembling face made her look so pitiful. And yet, there was utter disdain on her face. It was a new sight to see. Of course, only by being in Ed Rothsteller's shoes would I get to see Ayla, who had such a weak heart, had such disgust on her face. "Even if it's not you, for Taylor, he's already gone through so much. Isn't it enough already? There's no need to bully him anymore. I also saw you. It must have been hard enough already." Her trembling voice was so faint it sounded as though it was going to break, and yet she didn't stop talking till she spat out everything she wanted to say. More than anything, she was truly sincere in wanting to protect Taylor. I felt unnecessarily touched by her efforts. That's right, this was Ayla. It's funny how I felt moved by someone who was staring at me like they wanted to murder me. Clank. The iron cup Ayla was holding fell and started rolling on the stone grounds. She must have been on her way to get some water. It was only then that Taylor responded, having heard the sound of water splashing on the floor. Taylor slowly got up from the bench and started walking toward us. I felt a sense of disharmony then. That sense of weakness he had disappeared as he walked over. "Ed Roth's Taylor." He grabbed the sword tightly as he approached me, then he sent Ayla behind his back and he stared at me. "Still, I guess you still attend school." A low and serious voice. I was surprised to see that he looked fairly back to life. The Taylor that I saw when he lost the duel surely didn't look to have a bit of life left in him. So what happened? Taylor's unique willpower to live. No matter how powerful an opponent, he had a fighting spirit that would never break. I could definitely feel that sense of willpower in him. Had he already resurrected? It seemed so. After coming all the way here, I could see the whole story of what may have happened. I couldn't follow Taylor right away because of my duel with the princess. However, his childhood friend and biggest supporter, Ayla Triss, worriedly ran after him. And what happened next could be inferred without having to see it in person. No matter how high a wall or how difficult an ordeal may be, for anything that blocked Taylor's path, Ayla would always hug, encourage, and give him positive reinforcement. "It's okay. You can overcome it this time too. You've done so well thus far. I believe in you. You can do it. Don't be discouraged, Taylor." She was always there to give Taylor heartwarming support, crying and laughing by his side. As long as Ayla was with him, Taylor would always stand back up after getting knocked down. I think even Taylor knew about it. "Coming here. For what reason? What business do you have with me?" Because of her, Taylor was able to stand again. I was worried he might think I was bullying Ayla, which would explain why he hid her small body behind him as he looked straight at me with such burning volition. I was already used to this overwhelming feeling. Having played as Taylor countless times, it was because of this strong willpower that I felt fully immersed in the game. "You were quite good with the sword. I saw how you handled it. Tell me clearly what you are planning." "I don't have anything planned." For someone who used to despise you at the entrance exam to suddenly say such things, it couldn't be helped that he thought I was out of my mind. But I still wanted to tell him something, at the very least. I gained a sense of affection for him, having played Sylvania's failed swordmaster many times in the past. While I played the game, there were many times I felt he truly had a strong mental fortitude. No matter how difficult the challenges he faced were, I was always greatly encouraged by that strong willpower and never felt discouraged. coming to the hasty conclusion that he would lose the will to fight just because he got beaten by Lucy once. I guess I worried too much. He was supposed to be my solution, the one who would take on all the ordeals that would happen in the future. He was supposed to be that kind of a pushover. But after meeting him in person, my heart seemed to have changed a bit to some extent. Well, it was already a given that he would have to take care of all the hardships for me, but I should set that aside for now. I would seem heartless if I didn't. It. My eyes met with Ayla, her gaze still filled with contempt. But all I did was nod at her and then turned around. I was on pins and needles, worried that Taylor had collapsed. But no matter how praiseworthy or amazing of a friend they may be, having more contact may negatively impact the future. So I just turned around and walked away. I could feel their gazes on my back. And without looking, I knew their faces must be saying, just what the hell is wrong with that guy? Well, it was something that couldn't be helped. Shortly after, while the joint combat training was still underway, sparks started to soar through the sky. The students playing around the student center were all surprised as they looked at Nail Hall. Nobody thought that such a large-scale fire would break out so suddenly. Although it wasn't a fire in the first place. The flame of Taken, a high-ranking fire spirit, was a cursed flame that burned only the opponent targeted by the elementalist who summoned him. But that didn't mean it wasn't hot. The heat could definitely be felt spreading through the grounds. With this high temperature from a distance, the students in the audience probably felt like they were thrown into the desert. Was it already time for that? I went back towards Nail Hall with my hands in my pocket. This was the climax scene of the joint combat practice event for the first and second years. If this was the original story, we would all be sitting in the audience at Nail Hall, watching it together. But Lucy won over Taylor, which was different from what was supposed to happen. But thanks to the scale of the fire, I could tell from where I was. This was the duel between the Golden Daughter Lortel and Yennecar Polarover. To gauge the skills of the second year's star student, Lortel cast intermediate ice magic at risk of getting herself disqualified. The spell blew off the ceiling of Nail Hall. After all, the cost of repairing the ceiling was nothing to her. But because of that, Yennecar was forced to show off the full extent of her skills and brought out the manifestation of Taken, the strongest amongst all the spirits she had signed a contract with. I could picture what was happening even though I wasn't there. The firefly lizard wrapped around the large Nail Hall had the most overwhelming and grandest appearance among Yennecar's best friends. I caught a glimpse of her sitting on its flaming head. She grabbed onto the spirit's hard scales and swung her wand around, just in case she lost balance and fell off. It was quite a sight to see her smiling so cheerfully in such a situation. Never forgetting to smile, she truly was like the main character in a fairy tale. I sat on a bench nearby and leaned back. I was exhausted. I didn't really want to enter the Nail Hall, currently burning with heat. The appearance of the giant flaming lizard roaring against the backdrop of the setting sun was certainly quite surreal. Even though some things happened differently from the original, I was sure Taylor and Ayla were watching this same scene. This was going to be the final boss of Act 1, and also the first out of countless ordeals that Taylor would have to face. The top student of the second-year magic students at Sylvania Academy, Yennecar Polarover. I hoped they were watching it clearly. Because this would be the last chance they get to see her appearance like this. Chapter 18, The Golden Daughter 1. Hey. I was able to control the corners of my mouth from turning upside down through sheer superhuman restraint. Because I came back to an uninvited guest at my camp after gathering some edible plants and herbs. The guest was none other than the second-year top student, the so-called genius elementalist, Yennecar. She was sitting on my log by the fire, waving her feet around in greeting. We met by chance at the guardian tree of Merelda before, and she would often greet me because we had overlapping classes. Though I never properly returned any of her greetings. It's because I was trying to avoid Yennecar. Besides, her best friends would always appear like ghosts to take her away from me. I was actually thankful for that since I wanted to minimize my contact with her. But to Yennecar, who wanted to become friends with everyone, I must have been a big obstacle. I was sure her friends had already reminded her multiple times that nothing good would come out of befriending a jerk like Ed Roth's Taylor. Unfortunately for them, Yennecar had the attitude of a toddler. She always had a bubbly appearance, and even when she seemed to just be sitting still and not thinking, she would ultimately still go ahead and do whatever she thought was right. This very situation was conclusive proof. Wow, this is amazing. It's totally like a secret base here. She raised her hand and excitedly walked around in admiration, like an innocent child watching the first snow. Can I keep coming over to play? No, you can't, was what I wanted to say, but I was afraid she would get hurt if I said it so straightforwardly. Ah, this bright and energetic girl had some type of talent that made people want to protect her. That must be why our classmates cared so much about her. Well, if you find anything good about this place, then you can. This place feels like such an adventure. Ed, don't you think so too? Of course, my heart was pounding every day. A few days ago, I made a mistake when managing the campfire and the flame went out at dawn, so I almost got attacked by a wild boar. So even though both of our hearts were pounding, there was definitely a difference between the two. I want to talk to you more, there are things I want to ask you, and there's something I also need your advice on. Out of all the many people out there, why does it have to be me? But that would have been too cruel of a question to throw right at her face. No matter how necessary it was to keep my distance, treating others too rudely would just make my personality complete trash. But on the other hand, it was also true that there was nothing good about being too friendly. How did you know how to find this place? My camp was located in a corner of the wide northern forest, far away from both the academic and business districts. There were only a few people who knew that I lived out here. By any chance, did that wolf tell you? The most likely answer had to be Merylda. The high-ranking wind spirit Merylda was like family to Yennecar. And this was her forest too, so it would make sense if she had told Yennecar about me surviving in a corner of her forest. No, Merylda talks about you a lot, but she never told me about the location of your camp or any of your personal secrets. Because that was your personal business. Wow, that bastard. She was surprisingly protective of others' privacy, wasn't she? I thought she would have told Yennecar everything about me already since she was such a chatterbox. Then who the hell told Yennecar the location of my camp? And the answer is, Yennecar made a drumroll sound as if to announce who. Twisting my own hair around, I didn't give my answer right away, though I had already figured out who through the process of elimination. So it was Belle. Wow, why you're quite quick-witted. Belle Maya. That name, which I was somewhat unfamiliar with, referred to a senior maid at Ophelis Hall, famous for being the most luxurious of the 3 Sylvania Academy dormitories. How was she able to tell Yennecar about the location of this camp? Well, to talk about that, we'd have to go back to about a week ago. Name, Ed Roths Taylor. Gender, male. Age, 17. School year, 2nd. Species, human. Achievements, none. Vitality, 6. Intelligence, 5. Dexterity, 9. Willpower, 8. Luck, 6. Combat skills details. Magic skills details. Life skills details. Alchemy skills details. It was my long-awaited weekend, a time when I could finally take care of the things I had delayed the whole school week. First, I washed my sweat-soaked clothes from hunting all morning and hung them out to dry on a stone by the stream. It had already been 2 weeks since that troublesome joint combat practice class. Getting tied up with the main characters of the story had aged me by about 10 years. I also felt twice as tired, feeling like I was walking on a tightrope, always anxious about adversely affecting the main story while living my daily life. Though thankfully, after combat practice, there hadn't been any time when I got involved with the main characters. It had been a comfortable time for me. Being able to solely focus on my studies and survival, my stamina rose by an additional point. Although my relatively high dexterity stat slowly began to decrease in gaining experience for another point. From level 10 onwards, raising its level by even a point won't be easy. My vitality stat was really not that bad. Of course, it would look pathetic to combat department students who had overwhelming combat specs, but it was already at a level that could serve me well as an ordinary person. After all, the reference point for a high-performance stat was 10. Whether it be one's proficiency level or basic stat, the gains would become extremely low once level 10 is hit. From then on, bone-crushing efforts would be needed to raise them by even a little. And considering how the end specs were around 20, there was still a long way to go. But that was for extraordinary playable characters that went beyond the standards of an ordinary person. My current stats were already enough to live my life. Besides, thanks to my efforts, my body had already gained some muscles. Having taken my top off, I looked at my body's reflection on the water. As I thought, the vitality stat has a real impact. I had continuously been on a tight schedule for the past 2 months, pushing my human limitations. In order to keep up, my body started to adapt. Even if I couldn't become a macho man with thick wild muscles, at least my body had started to form muscles on my stomach, shoulders, and my forearms. This was a great achievement as Ed's original body was as skinny as an anchovy. Since this body had no physical talent to begin with, I thought it was fair to say I had made quite a bit of progress. However, my proficiency level for both my bow and my dagger was very low. My dagger was one of my most useful weapons, but it hadn't even accumulated any proficiency. I had been going at this for quite a long time now, but I still had a very long way to go. I should be training now so I can afford to be more comfortable later on. This isn't the time to be unnecessarily lazy. I had some pretty significant results, but I shouldn't be satisfied with them alone. I began to stretch my limbs, then bent my back and twisted my torso. I needed to start moving to take care of the work I hadn't been able to do all week. I was planning to make more firewood and cut some logs again. Then I planned to weave a net with my remaining time in the afternoon. I would gather all my remaining silk threads and layer them diagonally, then twist them into each section to make a complex net. But why was I making a net? While it would be for fishing, I planned to use it more importantly with fish preservation. I usually stored my meat in underground storage, but since I hadn't been preserving them for much longer, they also spoil quickly. Salting them all together had also become a problem since the salt I could harvest from my rock salt was never enough. The method I thought of was to smoke it. I could smoke the surface with wood which would slightly cook it. Then I could dry it out. Doing these would extend the shelf life of my fish by a few days, and would allow me to invest more time in my studies and other activities around the camp. But the smoked fish was still not as efficient as meat when it came to shelf life. Also, it tended to alter the taste, which made it hard to cook. This was why I thought of making a net. I would hang it on a branch by the stream and serve as a fish farm. If this were to work out well, then I can even store my fish alive. I can have both the freshness and the real taste of the fish. It should be a worthwhile attempt. I never had the energy to do it during the school week because of my classes and having to collect resources to live day by day. But having free time during weekends allowed me to experiment. I decided to quickly get on with making more firewood, then check on my school uniform, which should be dry by then, and then I could start working on my net. Z's. I started stretching my body some more, warming up with my top off. But as I arrived at my workbench, I found Lucy Mariel curled up on the tree's base, sleeping. I naturally picked her up and carried her on my shoulder like a sack of potatoes, then threw her inside the wooden shelter. Ooh, AGHK. Lucy tossed and turned on top of the soft marten and squirrel leather-covered bed. She then quietly breathed through her lips and fell sound asleep. It was Lucy's nap time. Right when I was just about to forget about her, she would come into my camp and use my bed. I don't even sigh anymore when I see her. I'll go cut 50 pieces of firewood and then check on my school uniform. I should be done in an hour. I spat on both my hands and grabbed my axe, then swung it down my first firewood of the day. Clank. Walk. I heard a loud crash behind me, so I turned around and saw Lucy gently stroking her forehead as if she had jumped up and hit her head on a wooden support stick. Lucy never woke up unless you pinch both her cheeks. But now she had suddenly jumped up on her own. What are you doing? Something stinks. She then grabbed her witch hat and ran out of my camp like the wind. I couldn't help but admire her lightning-like movements. In the blink of an eye, she had gone and disappeared. All that was left was the aftermath of the wind magic she used to blow off my sweat. What's with her? But it didn't take long for me to realize her reason. Who's over there? Out from the grass came Belle Maya, a senior maid at Ophelis Hall, Sylvania's most prestigious dormitory. I knew the detailed setup for the maids of Ophelis Hall. Ophelis Hall was where all sorts of nobles and talented students lived. And as the people who managed this dormitory, the Ophelis Hall maids all worked with the same skill and pride like that of a royal maid. They were usually specialists in their field and had received special education for it since childhood. But that was just part of their setup. I couldn't remember anything memorable about them having a huge influence on the game's story. They were just meant to emphasize just how special Ophelis Hall was, but there was none among them who had a significant impact on the main story. In other words, the Belle Maya I had just encountered had no recognition. If you were to look at her level of importance in the story, she was just a side character comparable to Ed Roth's Taylor, a villain who was written for a few scenes and then thrown away. I was thinking about walking deep into the forest for the first time in a while, but I didn't know I would be meeting the young Master Ed here. Ah, yes. It's been a while. You don't have to speak formally to me. Belle Maya was a very minor character in the story, but she would show up every so often and deliver a meaningful line. As an example, when the protagonist or heroine was faced with a challenge, she would say, "But the will in his eyes is still alive. I'm sure he will definitely win her, if it's her, she can surely overcome it," and other such lines. She was someone who gave some meaningful foreshadowing. She never actually did anything to solve the problem, but she would give the player the confidence that the problem would be solved. She was a necessary character that actually seemed kind of unnecessary. Other than that, she was the only person Lucy Mariel, a magician who only did whatever she wanted, was scared of. Whoever she was wouldn't really change no matter how much meaning was put into it. She was just a member of the side character club, like Ed Roth's Taylor. I'll just speak formally. I'm more uncomfortable with you speaking so formally. Either way, I am no longer a noble. But you are still a student at Sylvania. Her neat black short hair and modest behavior explained how she became a senior maid at Ophelis Hall, a place full of professionals. Even though she had come this deep into the forest, her elegant maid uniform didn't have a single wrinkle, despite her being unable to use beginner's magic. If I'm speaking honestly, I am quite surprised. She didn't look the tiniest bit sincere despite saying such words. Your tone of voice has changed quite a bit, and you now have such a strong physique. Only then did I realize that I was half naked. I rarely get embarrassed, but seeing her unchanged poised expression was rather embarrassing. I think it's quite a wonderful change. I am happy. Oh, yes, you can speak casually, but I don't want to. Quote ellipsis quote. I couldn't tell because of her expressionless face, but I may have poked at her strange pride just then. You have to. But I don't want to. When you lived in Ophelis Hall, you did so. That was then. When I used to live in Ophelis Hall. All of the Ophelis Hall maids had a strange stubbornness that was hard to understand. I saw that Belle was holding a big basket in one hand. Glancing at its contents, it seemed like it was filled with all kinds of mushrooms, wild vegetables, and fruits. Meals at Ophelis Hall mostly used high-quality ingredients delivered from various stores. But when fresh ingredients were essential, there would be times that the maids would obtain them locally. Seeing her do this made me understand that internet meme about calling Ophelis Hall maids human livestock manufacturers. The students didn't have to do anything, all they needed to do was sit still and open their mouths. I knew that you still attended the academy. I helped the young lady Yennecar with her morning preparations, and she always talks about you, young Master Ed. Is that so? But I had no idea that you were living like this. When you left Ophelis Hall, your face looked like it was the end of the world. I thought you would end up leaving the academy. How strange for maids like her to feel uncomfortable when someone talked to them with respect. Just what kind of education did they receive to have this kind of mindset? But what caught my eyes was the basket she was holding. It was full of all sorts of mushrooms, wild vegetables, and fruits. I felt limited by the knowledge I was getting from books when it came to edible plant life. Since the contents of that basket should all be edible, if I could just get one, then the types of plants I could collect would increase dramatically. I never touched mushrooms and fruits, in particular, because there were quite toxic ingredients if not handled properly. I couldn't help but drool at the opportunity to open my door to more options. Belle Maya may appear quite cold, but she was actually quite nice. She would willingly accept if I were to ask for help. Just as I mentioned, she was just a side character that had not much influence on the story. Nothing big would change or happen should we interact or become closer to each other. In fact, there may be more benefits than harm. If we become a bit closer, then wouldn't I be able to ask for ingredients, fabrics, and other various work tools left around Ophelis Hall? At this point, wouldn't it be more stupid if I were to push her coldly away? The faces of the Ophelis Hall maids were rarely even shown throughout the entire game. That's right. It shouldn't matter if we become close to each other. After I came to that conclusion, I adjusted my voice and spoke to Belle Maya in a welcoming tone, with a comfortable smile. Coming all the way deep into the forest to procure such ingredients, you have been through so much. But as for that basket, that's right, it should be fine if we become friends. And that was a choice I would regret making until the end of the story. Yeah, I talked to Belle so much about you, Ed. That's why when Belle and I were talking, she suddenly told me about how she met you here. Was Belle really going around revealing my private information like that? Something that even a high-ranking wind spirit was protecting. No, I was sure the Belle Maya I knew was quiet and wouldn't talk about others so carelessly. After all, being tight-lipped was one of the most basic qualities of an experienced maid. And as far as I knew, Belle Maya was an elite maid equipped with such a basic skill. Since it's the weekend, she told me to come and visit you. Look, she even tied my hair up so prettily today. Look here, isn't it pretty when it's braided to one side like this? Oh, would you look at this kid? Ah, is that so? So, about this concern I talked about earlier. Yennecar sat down and held her knees, slowly getting to her point. At first, I wondered why she went to me amongst so many other people. While looking at the burning campfire, Yennecar finally managed to say it. Ed, you might not have seen it since you left first. But during the joint combat practice last month, I ended up hurting some people. It was the event in which she summoned Taken, a high-ranking fire spirit, and covered the entire nail hall in flames. It was one of the largest scaled events that would take place this semester. It was obvious who she ended up hurting. Although it was just a natural reaction, considering the first year Lortel broke the rules first and used intermediate magic, that was only a secondary fact for Yennecar, who had a good heart. But why was I the one counseling her? In the first place, all of the students were on Yennecar's side. Yennecar was bubbly and lovely, and to the second years, she was a precious treasure. Whenever she felt guilty or would blame herself, everyone would rush and come forward to encourage and side with her. However, Yennecar knew that all of their evaluations and opinions were one-sided. They weren't able to make objective and fair judgments because they cared about Yennecar. While she may be thankful that they were always on her side unconditionally, that didn't mean any of the mistakes she had made would disappear. That was why she came to me. She knew I was less inclined to take her side. I wouldn't be judging the event simply from her perspective. She was very kind and upright, that's why her relationship with Lortel was this bad. You know, even when I try to forget it all, as I thought, I went too far, and, did I overreact so much that I ended up hurting her that much? I can't get rid of these thoughts. I see. Should I go and apologize? Do whatever you want. But my friends always stop me from apologizing because she did something wrong in the first place. Then don't do it. As long as you think it's right. Yennecar sat still, her chin resting on top of her knees. I decided not to force my opinions on her. This was a situation where I couldn't be sure how it would affect her. Yennecar was too important for me to influence her behavior by making a right or wrong judgment. But I couldn't help but want to promise her everything would be alright. As expected of Ed, however, her response was more surprising than I thought. Ed, you never unconditionally take my side. I can't help it if it makes you sad. No, don't misunderstand. Yennecar smiled as she enjoyed the burning campfire. Somehow, the tension in the air seemed a little less than usual. I don't feel bad at all. Not one bit. In fact, I feel relieved. Simple meaningful words kept on coming out. I wish that everyone in the world was more like you, Ed. I didn't have the time to think about what those words meant. Because I had a pile of work I had to finish today. I would like to purchase 2 hours of your time, Ed Roth's Taylor. It happened 2 days later. The moment I came out of my elemental studies class to eat lunch. She looked elegant and quite polite at first glance, but her bright turquoise eyes were filled with greed for money. Her reddish-brown hair was neatly combed and was tied up to her shoulder blades, running down her shoulders. There was a small bandage from the bottom of her neck to her forearm, a result of her injury during the joint combat practice class. It had been a long time since then. It made me realize just how serious her injuries must have been if she still had some wounds left. That nice girl Yennecar must have completely stomped on her. She was waiting for me in the academic district, sitting on a bench with a rather dignified posture. I knew who she was. She was someone who would become at odds with Princess Peenia, acting like cats and dogs. She was one of the 4 heroines of Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster. The only daughter of Eld Kehaland, the greatest merchant on the continent. A rare businesswoman who climbed to the top of the tower of gold coins with only her desire for wealth. In the future, people would pay respect to her by calling her the Golden Daughter. Chapter 19, The Golden Daughter 2. Lortel was someone who understood human greed better than anyone else. She wasn't someone who would have an active role until Act 2, well after Yennecar had left, but her face would pop up here and there in Act 1 as well. Her roles before and after Act 1 were clearly different. Although she was already quite infamous even in Act 1. Bad Ending Maker, Newbie Grinder, the Developer's Curse. These were what players used to call her. Other than these nicknames, people also used to say such hurtful words against Lortel in Act 1. I couldn't remember much of my newbie days from long ago, but just remembering how many times Lortel used to ruin me in Act 1 still made me shudder. Getting involved with Lortel in Act 1 always guaranteed a bad ending. During Taylor's class assignment examination event, you could choose to rescue Lortel from a kobold raid, but rescuing her would result in Taylor witnessing Lortel's secret. Later on, Lortel would have Taylor kidnapped and taken out of the academy until he was declared missing. That was bad ending number 2. In the monster subjugation episode, there was an opportunity to be in the same group as Lortel. But if you chose to join the same group as her rather than join your friend Ayla's group, Ayla would fall off a cliff and die. Why? Because Ayla stumbling off a cliff would trigger an event where Taylor would be able to quickly catch her. But of course, if you joined Lortel's group, Taylor wouldn't be able to save Ayla, resulting in her death. That was bad ending number 7. During the joint combat practice event, there was an option to protect Lortel from the high-ranking fire spirit token summoned by Yennecar, but in doing so, Taylor would get burned and seriously injured. That was bad ending number 13. Then during the subjugation of Glasgow, there was an event to reclaim the student center by breaking into Nail Hall using the way proposed by Lortel. But if you were to follow her advice, Taylor would be ambushed and killed by a bunch of spirits that were waiting on that path. That was bad ending number 22. Swearing at the developers for creating such a character couldn't be helped, but if you were to play Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster all the way to the end, you would start to understand the developer's intentions and even begin to admire it. The intention wasn't that complicated either. Lortel Kehaland's role was as the hidden heroine, a character who was the complete opposite of the righteous and benevolent Princess Peenia. Lortel had only been treated as a character to control and take over, but her true character would be revealed in the second half of the story. The twist in her story and the unexpected gap between her two sides made the players recognize her strong charms as a character. Only talking and understanding calculations, Lortel grew up with no choice but to gradually view the world calculatingly. She led a life of picking up and eating bread thrown away at the slums. She developed beliefs that were built on fraud and deceit. She harbored a loneliness that had swallowed a part of her heart, yet no matter how much money she accumulated, it never disappeared. While the players' opinion of Lortel would slowly improve little by little, and they finally began to understand the loneliness engraved in her life, it was at that precise moment that a question would be asked. Would you be on the side of the student council, led by the benevolent princess, or on the side of the top class, led by the golden daughter Lortel? Would you support the upright beliefs and idealism shown by the noble Princess Pinia, or would you support Lortel's realism, who had been fighting loneliness in the wild-like reality? Excuse me. Ed. 2. Summarize, the system that had constantly been driving players into bad endings in Act 1 was intentional. The players began to consciously avoid Lortel due to them falling trapped in her bad endings. This formed a psychological gap between the players and Lortel. The larger the gap, the more dramatic the twist reveal would be to the player in the future. I was talking about the true harmony between the system and the story. Ed Roth's Taylor. Hello, can you hear me? It was quite amazing when I looked back on it. I nodded my head in satisfaction as I walked. Well, there's that. And then there was this. How long are you going to keep following me? I had no idea you would be this stubborn in ignoring me. No, I need to be stubborn and ignore her. Wasn't it obvious? It was always better to set the mood first in whatever you did. That's what this was. Seeing her in front of my elemental studies class in the academic district, she immediately threw out a meaningful line. Not bad. I would like to purchase 2 hours of your time, Ed Roth's Taylor. That was certainly a great start. This student was the golden daughter Lortel. Someone such as her coming out of nowhere to make me an offer was certainly something that made me curious. Normally, I should have started asking her questions. What did you mean you wanted to buy 2 hours of my time? What were you planning on making me do? If you wanted to buy it, then did that mean you would give me money? How much money would you give me? Would you give it to me right now? What was your true intention? If I asked such questions, Lortel would continue the conversation with a grin on her face. That was probably what Lortel thought was going to happen. Naturally, she would steer the conversation to form around the questions I asked, controlling and avoiding certain questions while taking the lead in the situation. Considering Lortel's specialty was her silver tongue, she had the ability to negotiate and talk until you found yourself falling into her proposal before you could even come to your senses. But that would be if I didn't know what her intentions were. Maybe you've heard parts of the story already. As I knew, I shattered all her expected developments and strode along, ignoring her. And yet she kept on following me. The difference in our strides was quite wide. She had to follow me at a quicker pace, but this didn't slow her down. I heard you are having a hard time after being disowned. Perhaps I could be of some help. Don't say things you don't mean. Oh my, speaking politely is more important than you might think. It means you respect the other person. She didn't care at all about my ride manners due to her nature. Lortel ran in front of me and adorably held her hands behind her back with a cute smile on her face. Don't you want to hear me out? It's not a bad suggestion. She had that look on her face. I felt touched after seeing you. She then spat out her story in her sly way. Of course, it's not like I haven't heard the rumors that you were a little small tiny bit arrogant and egotistical, but that's fine. It's honestly not that important. Ha ha ha. Everyone already knew how awful Ed Roth's Taylor was, but she said it so fast like rapid gunfire. It's only human nature to want to give out a helping hand after watching you continue to learn here despite it being such a difficult environment. After all, there was a time when I was also poor and hungry. So, a deposit of 3 plain gold coins. It was as much money as the maids at Cullen Hall, one of the other dormitories where ordinary students lived, would make for a full month's work. I wouldn't have to worry about next semester's tuition payment if I had 20 gold coins. I want to become friends with Yennecar. Ha ha ha. I started laughing even without her explanation. I knew it. The difference in values between Pinia and Lortel was a key conflict throughout the story. Ultimately, it was going to become important who Taylor would decide to side with. It was still uncertain at this point, so I shouldn't be too hasty and take either side just yet. Can't you introduce me, please? All you have to do is come with us, and the 3 of us can all talk together. I don't think it will even take the full 2 hours. Since becoming the daughter of gold, do you buy personal connections with money? Well, I won't be coy about it then. Lortel took 3 gold coins from her sleeve and put them in my pocket. Here, keep this for now. I know it well. The more people on my side, the better. Lortel seemed to have realized this intuitively. After all, she had been living her whole life walking on a tightrope, people watching her from below. She would eventually get into a political battle with Princess Peenia soon. It was best to make as many allies as she could from now on. The rift between the two wasn't something that could be closed by being considerate and giving in a little bit. As I stood still, staring at her, Lortel began to smile that cunning smile of hers again. "You're looking at me as if I'm a pathetic person." Usually, by now, people would be trying to hide their faces, thinking, "Wow, what a jackpot." I spoke with a big grin on my face. "All right, let's shake on it once." Nobody knew the true nature of greed as well as Lortel did. At least, that was what she thought. Mad and immature greed was like a disease that had reached the incubation period. It was quite easy to control when the situation was calm, but the moment you were pushed into a corner and urgently needed a bit of money, then that greed could take over an entire person's being. Those who didn't have food for tomorrow soon became those who no longer have a place to rest. And just a bit of money would make their eyes look bloodshot. As a native of the slums, Lortel knew that feeling very well. Not only that, but the bigger the difference in wealth there was, the more the power of greed would consume a human's heart, making it uncontrollably strong. Those who had once lived a lofty lifestyle would collapse the moment they faced poverty. She had seen too many debtors take their own lives because they couldn't accept the difference between when they had money and now that they were broke. The amount of gold it took for them to break down wasn't at the scale of a house or a property either. Ultimately, it came down to one small coin. No, it wasn't the amount of money that was important. Because even if you were to offer the same amount, someone would always be willing to sell more. Selling one's pride for just one gold coin. Selling one's family for just one gold coin. Even selling oneself for just one gold coin. The market price of a gold coin wouldn't change and was set, but those who were cornered without a choice would always bring more and more things to sell. Because there was no other option. Because it was the only path they could see. That was why the first time was really important. Holding that gold coin in their hand after the first time, thinking it was fine because it was just once, it would then become the beginning of a disaster that would drive a cornered person off a cliff. The first time was the starting point of all subsequent schemes and tactics. It was so easy and simple to take advantage of someone who was desperate. It was quite sad. Quote. When Lortel finally came to her senses, Edroth's tailor had already left. Was it because she was flustered for a second? Well, that was quite interesting. Looking at Ed's back as he left, Lortel let out a giggle. When he shook her small hand, the 3 gold coins she had shoved in his pocket had found their way back into her hands. He had an attitude that didn't even let them become a bit closer. It was as if he had understood all of Lortet's intentions from the very beginning. Chapter 20, The Golden Daughter 3. Lortel was an extreme realist who was also very good at compromising. It was Lortel's fate to become one. She had big ambitions but lacked natural ability. Hearing that from someone else would probably make one wonder what it meant. This was because as soon as Lortel was admitted into the academy, she was one of the only 3 students who qualified for Class A by Professor Glast. She had a photographic memory, so much so that reading something only once was enough for her to memorize the core concepts of a book. Her mana resonance was also high, so high that ordinary students couldn't follow. And she even came from a rich background, coming from the Elt Company. However, no matter what she did, she couldn't reach the very top. There was Lazy Lucy, in the magic department, who was treated as some sort of celestial being. Lortel's combat senses such as her agility, improvisation, and judgment were no match for the spear from nature's eggs. Her family's background and her noble status, coupled with her innate personality and her ability as a leader, all of these were useless when compared to her nemesis, Princess Peenia. Fate mischievously only allowed her to live a second-rate life. And the means that Lortel used to break through fate's curse was pure desire. Oh my, it's Yennecar. Understanding profits and losses, income and expenditure, doing calculations. It was Lortel's perseverance that made both arms of the scale lean towards her, even for a little bit. She had a compromising attitude that was willing to join hands with an awful and merciless realism or a necessary evil without any hesitation. Living her life like this stigmatized Lortel as an opportunist, but she didn't find that particularly insulting. Rather, she thought it far more disgraceful to not seize the string of opportunities that came her way. I was going to visit you with a present, but I ended up meeting you here. Oh, you're Lortel. You look really different with your hair down. I hear that often. They met at a corridor in Ophelis Hall, the dormitory that boasted the most luxurious facilities among the 3 dormitories in Sylvania. For a student to be allowed to stay at Ophelis, one of the 2 conditions had to be met: overwhelming status or overwhelming grades. Yennecar satisfied the latter while Lortel satisfied both as the successor of the Eld Company. But this didn't mean their living conditions were significantly any different. Lortel was heading back to her room after taking an evening bath, attended by an Ophelis Hall maid. Due to this, her outfit was rather simple, and her hair, which was yet to dry, was untied. To Yennecar, her impression looked quite new. I caused a big commotion a while back after I arbitrarily used intermediate magic during the joint combat practice class. Truth was, part of me was particularly impulsive. It's been a while since the incident, but I still wanted to apologize. I see. The reason Lortel attached Yennecar with the intermediate ice magic, ice spear, and flash freeze, was to gauge her skills as the top student of the second years. There was no denying it, the leading force in Sylvania's magic department was the first years. But despite this, they couldn't be guaranteed a victory in a duel when their opponents were of a higher grade than they were. Nevertheless, Yennecar's title as being the best student among the second years wasn't in vain. Among the first years, Lucy Mayriel was the undisputed first place, so it didn't make sense to discuss who the top student was. But at least Lortel's name wasn't left out when discussing who was second. But she wondered what the gap was between her and Yennecar. Unfortunately, Lortel's attempt to gauge it had not much meaning, because even her intermediate elemental magic, which even third years couldn't handle, didn't cause any significant damage to Yennecar, who summoned a high-ranking fire spirit. Arrogance was expensive. Even though it had been a while since the class ended, Lortel still needed to wear bandages inside her clothes due to minor wounds that hadn't healed yet. Your wounds haven't completely healed yet. Lortel sharply caught on to the fact that Yennecar still felt a bit of guilt about her wounds. Yennecar Polarover was too nice. It was because of her good nature that the people around her felt a strong protective instinct towards her, making her an idol among the second years. Moreover, the second years had been feeling miserable from being overshadowed by the first years. As Yennecar was the only one who showcased her competency against them, she became a savior to second years as well. In a way, this was all due to Lortel, who she beat horribly in the joint combat training class. She was just the adorable and cute top second-year student who was also an elementalist, but now, she had become the only light and hope for the second years. Those eyes filled with anticipation, following her, had made her an object of envy. It should heal soon. You don't have to worry about it too much. Lortel believed that personal connections led to social power. Since Lortel had lived her life realizing this fact, she didn't put on a smile for the cute second year. Having someone indebted to you could be considered an asset. And it would be foolish of Lortel to not use the assets she had. With this in mind, Lortel thought of starting an exchange with Yennecar through her debt as an opportunity. I guess you didn't get along with Ed. Once in a while, Yennecar's smile could truly take your breath away. In business, such a sly smile could be seen as being double-faced. This was because merchants were the type of people to take advantage of those with a kind and pure smile. But strangely enough, Lortel didn't feel any sense of malice in Yennecar's smile. Lortel was also pretty sharp by nature. Yennecar's question was a pure question. It was without any malice or hidden intention. I hear everything around the northern part of the forest. Spirits tend to be quite the chatterboxes. Yennecar must have chased after Ed after he ignored Lortel's words. But wasn't the route he took leading towards the entrance of the northern forest? Originally, the northern forest was Yennecar's territory. That was because most of the spirits playing in the northern forest were on Yennecar's side. But Lortel could only see far enough into the edge of the entrance to the forest. And to say that Ed Roth's tailor was in Yennekar's territory was just ridiculous because the conversation Lortel had with him was not something she could just proudly reveal, even as empty words. Lortel thought of using money to buy Yennekar as a personal connection. And then use her as an opportunity to gauge Ed Roth's tailor, who was currently stuck in a tight spot. He really wasn't in a situation to be acting this stubborn. You probably have your own way of doing things, but given the amount of respect Yennekar received, she was certainly worthy enough of being called a saint. Ed must have his own way of doing things too. And from my point of view, I am more moved by his efforts. Quote. Of course, your willingness to use gold coins as a means to become closer with me also made me feel really emotional, but sincerity isn't something that money could buy. Am I being too condescending? It's my first time having someone younger than me, so I think I may be acting like I'm too full of myself. This is so embarrassing. Even after knowing what Lortel did, she didn't deny or swear at Lortel's methods. Lortel finally understood why everyone loved Yennekar. A girl who walked straight out of a fairy tale. But this description of her, of someone who was cute and lively, also had a subtle diss. It could also mean that she was someone who didn't know much about the world, someone who had lived in a flower garden all her life. It sounded like that to Lortel. But they must have severely misjudged Yennekar. She understood the darkness of the other side of the world, she just chose to continue living her life without losing her cheerful nature. To be standing in front of such dazzling light, someone with a black heart would crawl back into the darkness in shame. If everyone lived in dirt together, then being dirty would be the standard appearance of all humans. But that was just an illusion, of course. Because there would definitely be people like Yennekar. And it wasn't like Lortel didn't know that. Ed is probably someone who's much more strong-willed and funnier than you think. What? Is that so? But why do you think so? Yennekar giggled and spun around, untying her braid. It's a secret. Lortel then realized they had arrived in front of Yennekar's room. Once Yennekar entered the room, she planned on relaxing comfortably by untying her braids and loosening the straps on her cute and frilly casual clothes. Well, the spirits always keep gossiping amongst themselves, but whenever something stands out, it seems very stalkerish. Isn't being friendly with spirits something to be proud of? Thanks for saying that tilde, but I'm the only one in the whole world who knows those fun facts. Yennekar spun in front of her door and smiled brightly. Only she knew what the spirits had told her about Ed. I should get going now. Dean McDowell told me I should try and sign a contract with another high-ranking spirit next month. In order to do that, I have to study and prepare a lot of things. Didn't you just sign a contract with a high-ranking fire spirit? These days, expectations from me have risen quite a bit. I need to work hard. Yeah, it's a good thing that people were expecting a lot from me. After saying that, Yennekar opened her door wider. That's right. Lortel. Yennekar said her name with her unique and charming smile. I'm sorry about last time. You got hurt a lot because of me, right? I hope you get better soon. Yennekar slowly closed the door after saying that, looking relieved. And Lortel herself saw how much consideration Yennekar had for her for saying that. In front of the softly closed door, Lortel thought it over for a long time. Ed Roth's tailor is definitely an interesting person. Lortel couldn't guess why Yennekar had such a high opinion of him. Looking back, there was a strange sense of danger in her lively and relaxed appearance. But no matter how hard she thought of what the reason might be, she couldn't come up with a clear answer right away. Name: Ed Roth's tailor. Gender: male. Age: 17. School year: 2nd. Species: human. Achievements: none. Vitality: 6. Intelligence: 5. Dexterity: 9. Willpower: 8. Luck: 6. Newly crafted product: farming fishing net. After weaving the net, it is installed onto a branch so it wouldn't collapse into the flowing stream. Caught fish could be kept alive for several days. Production difficulty level: 2. Production completed. Production skills have increased. The net I invested half my day into ended up becoming more effective than I had thought. I made the fishing net for about half of it and used up the net immediately. But for the other half, I set up something like a hammock, making it a good resting place. I thought it wouldn't be so bad, so I was quite satisfied with the results. I started to become greedy as my living space became more and more furnished. My diet had also diversified and improved in one way or another. And above all else, the amount of physical strength I needed to use had decreased a lot. In the past, running to the academic district rendered me exhausted the entire day. But I had started being able to lightly walk even on my way back just recently. Even if I were to fall asleep late at night, I could open my eyes feeling refreshed the next morning. I was becoming more and more confident and satisfied with this life. Magic skills details. Grade: low-grade magician. Specialized field: elements. Common magic. Fast casting LVL2. Mana sense LVL5. Fire element magic. Ignite LVL10. Wind element magic. Wind blade LVL10. Since I hadn't been able to use any intermediate magic properly just yet, I could still only use 2 beginner magic skills. But since I could repeatedly practice these skills until I was sick of them, and because I was in an environment where I could only survive by actually maintaining a fire going, I was able to reach my initial goal of having a skill reach level 10. So if I focused on casting them, I was now able to knock down a thick tree in one fell swoop. Even controlling the campfire became a piece of cake. Of course, I wasn't able to use it freely since my inherent mana capacity was rather small. But with this, only a few of the first years would be more skilled than I was when it came to Wind Blade and Ignite. After becoming more proficient in elemental magic, my daily life had become more convenient. Cutting firewood with just a small bit of magic or adjusting the fire during the night. It also helped a lot when processing materials for production. If I were being honest, I was actually having quite a lot of fun. Before going to the academic district in the morning, I looked at my camp, all of my things packed and ready to go. It may not be that amazing, but it was something I had built with my own 2 hands. And with this unknown sense of pride and satisfaction, I wanted to try doing many more things. First things first today, smoking meat was taking too much time and effort. I wondered if I could make a proper smoker so the smoke wouldn't spread and flow out. But I couldn't think of a good idea on how I should go about designing it. I guess I could just make one some other time. After I finished trimming my bow, I checked on my laundry and then on my jerky on the drying rack, then sat back down by the fire. My schoolwork from today went somewhat well. After looking over Senior Professor Iskin's written assignment for elemental studies, I should be done for the day. Considering it was still early in the evening, I'd say I've developed quite the talent in managing my time and daily routine. I hummed while finishing up trimming my last arrow. These days, everything I did was producing better results, so I couldn't help but feel good throughout the day. If I could somehow spend every normal day until graduation just like today, then there wouldn't be any problems with my plan. Thinking about these relaxing thoughts, I wrapped up the day. Bang! And just like that, a monster suddenly flew in, smashing through the drying rack that I worked so hard to make, its body rolling over on the ground before coming to a stop. A flock of birds flew overhead and a thick layer of dust obscured my view for a short while. When I looked down where I had been trimming my arrows, I saw a familiar witch hat that I was reluctantly getting used to. Sure enough, looking up a bit farther ahead was Lucy Mariel on the ground, the smashed drying rack beside her. It was quite a spectacle to see her covered in dirt, face stuck on the trunk of an old tree. What is this? I stood up, reacting a bit late. Lucy, who was lying down, responded slowly. I almost died. That wasn't a line I expected to come out of Lucy's mouth. Why was this girl, who was supposed to be walking around, floating like some sort of spirit, suddenly fall here in such a way? From what I knew, the only one in this academy who could fight Lucy on equal footing was Headmaster Obel at best. But if there was someone who could fight her to the point of nearly killing her, then there must have been a variable I wasn't aware of somewhere. In this suddenly escalating crisis, I stood up quickly and asked Lucy. You almost died. Just who was it? Belle Maya, the name of a senior maid at Ophelis Hall. What the hell? I picked up the fire poker that I could grab nearest and threw it at Lucy. I thought it would just bounce off, but surprisingly, she didn't use any reactive defense magic to block it. The poker triggered her like a finger flick to the forehead, making her tear up and lay down on the ground. Ah, the black mark on her forehead was quite impressive. Is lying down here the right thing to be doing? I'm out of mana. That speed that couldn't be followed by mere human eyes, not to mention the tremendous aftermath, it must mean she used the high-ranking spatial type magic Space Leap. High-ranking magic was something that even professors were only able to use by reciting the incantation with full concentration. After dinner, I was going to skip the monthly meeting called by the head of the dormitory, but I got caught. So, Belle was so angry that she clenched her fist and came towards me. I began to remember some of Lucy's even scenes that I remembered. This troublemaker whom no one could contain had one natural enemy, it was none other than Belle Maya. Lucy had no way to deal with the incarnation of fear that was Belle, who would tighten her fists as if to attack whenever Lucy caused an accident, or forgot her schedule, or wasn't keeping a tidy appearance. It was a stance with a deep-rooted tradition of overpowering troublemakers such as Lucy. It would be a bit funny to see Lucy, an extraordinarily rare genius, being overpowered by one maid. However, no matter how talented Lucy was, she wouldn't do anything absurd enough to touch the maids of Ophelis Hall. It was an unwritten rule in Sylvania that the maids of Ophelis Hall, who supported students without an inch of error, must always be respected. Before such an unwritten rule even made its rounds, the students living in Ophelis Hall already subconsciously felt a sense of indebtedness to the maids. Even though they were students already used to always being treated with respect, the Ophelis Hall maids' competence was enough for them to still be in shock. That's why they were considered an elite group of maids. Housework such as cleaning and cooking were basic skills, but they could also support the students' academic life or even demonstrate simple magic. Since they were extremely faithful to their job of supporting the students, they never took unnecessary actions and most of them were reserved. This meant Belle Maya's rougher outer appearance and personality were not her individually. I thought that it would hurt so much so I ran away. It all happened so suddenly. In short, Lucy applied fast casting and wordless casting with spatial type magic to fly, not just a far distance but all the way from Ophelis Hall to here. If you forcibly increased the casting speed or overlapped the casting, or if you were thinking about other things, the magic efficiency would be ruined. Such actions were cause for worry, not just 2 or 3 times more, but 2 or 3 times squared more. On top of that, the magic Lucy forcibly used was high-ranking magic, not to mention spatial type magic. It was the equivalent of flying a private jet to a convenience store right in front of your house. It was only natural that even Lucy's magic, which was overflowing like the sea, would run out in an instant. You couldn't even call Headmaster Obel over for this type of thing. Thinking about this absurd situation, I was left speechless. Belle Maya, who was very angry, approached her with a whirling fist, so like a cat who jumped on a cucumber that fell on the side of the road, Lucy flew all the way over here. Lucy, still on the ground in her loose pajamas, let out a whine. So tiring. Isn't this what you deserve? I'm having an especially hard time these days. Particularly because of that senior maid who became extra sensitive. Belle Maya, that robot-like maid who was always focused on her responsibilities without a change in her facial expression. You might not be able to tell from the outside but I could. She's really sensitive nowadays. I guess there is someone she is worried about, but being like that, I wonder if her anger would fall on me too. Lucy, who was covered in dirt from lying on the ground like that, finally began to say it. You know, she would always say the same thing whenever she knew I was here. The end of her sentence was obvious without even having to hear the rest of her words. Do you have any beef jerky? She must be really craving it. I took a deep breath and raised my finger, pointing at her. At the spot where Lucy had flown in and crashed into, were the remains of the drying rack and the strips of jerky that were drying on it. Needless to say, the jerky had fallen on the floor and was covered in dirt, obviously in a state where they couldn't be eaten. Ha! Lucy's face quickly turned blue at the sight. I took advantage of that moment to flick my finger on her forehead. Lucy, who had no magic power left, just rolled on the floor, screaming.